Good, okay. It's 7:07 PM, and I'm calling the June 17th, 2025 Planning Board meeting to order. The meeting is being recorded by HWCAM, and we'll start with roll call. So when I call your name, would you please indicate that you're present? Pat Norton?
Present.
Jonathan Poor?
Jonathan Poor, present.
Bill Wheaton?
Bill Wheaton, present.
Emil Dahlquist?
Emil Dahlquist, present.
Beth Herr?
Present.
Matt Hamill?
Present.
Jeff Austin?
Jeff Austin, present.
And Marnie Crouch, present. And I note for the recording that Darcy is not going to be able to make it this evening. So our first order of business is the review and vote on draft minutes. So we'll take, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes from April 8th, 2025.
April 8th. Okay, I had some changes to that.
Right. We can either get a second to the motion and then have a discussion.
I'll make a motion to accept it.
And now we'll have our discussion. Okay. Yes, there are a few issues. So I noted that in the second paragraph under agenda item number 1, there was a word missing. I added the word appropriate. And I believe in the third full paragraph on page 2, the last sentence, there was a word missing, and I added the word in the future, the word future. And I think the other thing that I noticed in the 7th paragraph, in the middle, it said built since 1940. I think it should be built before 1940. Those were very minor, but I know other people had some issues. So do you want to put them out there for us to consider?
Sure. I had a number of changes. In the second paragraph, on the first page under agenda, 2 paragraphs down, it says Chair Crouch indicated she did not think these uses were, and that was
It's your word.
something. And then in the third paragraph, I didn't know, actually what we had talked about was the bylaw being uniform to not the 20%, but what our actual bylaw, which is every 7 units. But we had said, what came out in that conversation was there wasn't enough time because of our shortened time frame. We didn't have enough time to go to the state and ask if we could have that accommodation to make it every 7 instead of 10%. So the 20% was off. And then the last sentence said, Mr. Connors confirmed the sunset clause would likely be stricken in this case. And then I just think it would be helpful to say, without being returned to town meeting for a vote. I mean, maybe our council can speak to that, but my understanding is that the AG could strike the sunset clause without it having to go back to town meeting, and I'd be happy to be corrected if that's the case.
Are you asking me a question or are you reviewing it?
Well, that we're reviewing minutes, but that was the question. That's the question I had then, so I'll put that down as a question for later. How's that? No, that's great. Yeah. We don't want to change it. So just that it would be returned to town meeting. It would, without being returned to town meeting at the last paragraph. I sent these to Mark. And then in the second page, on paragraph 3, that sentence was also unfinished.
Right.
I think it was another hanging statement from Marnie.
Yeah.
So those, I don't know what needed to be said to finish those 2 statements.
Any other comments?
I had a comment on page 2 of 3, 4th paragraph down. Mr. Dahlquist asked how the planners took the streets into account while creating the new district, since the downtown streets provide the unified character for the downtown area. I believe the way it was asked was why were streets not used to organize the town center rather than districts? And then Mr. Littell answered. I think that's consistent with his answer. What is written there? So just that first sentence. It was a different question that was asked.
Any other comments?
Paragraph 7,
On the first page or second page?
Second page, sorry. Paragraph 7, second page. Mr. Poor requested that there be landscaping and beautification recommendations. I don't think I said that. I might have said site design recommendations. I don't know what the word was, but I certainly would not have used the word beautification. That should be stricken from here. Never used. And then it also goes on to say, asked if there were any protected buildings downtown on a historic register. I'm not sure that I asked that, but I guess it can stand. And then I think paragraph 8 might have been Emil's question, and I don't remember what the question was, really.
No, maybe I asked that.
Somebody,
Come to think
I
of
know
it.
I didn't ask it.
So this was the meeting where we didn't have video recording?
Right,
So
exactly.
it's very
That's-
possible that...
That they didn't understand the voices.
Yeah. So I can't comment on whether that's correct or not, but I certainly know I didn't say it, so
I think I asked about that corner, to tell you the
So
truth.
does the question look correct?
So might I suggest that everyone sends their comments directly to Mark, and then he can
Okay.
make these?
I have a few more, so.
Oh, you have a
if
few more. I'm sorry, go ahead.
You want me to, okay.
Yeah.
And then paragraph 9, last paragraph on page 2, Mr. Poor requested that the code amendments address smaller aspects of development. I don't know what that means. I would assume that means site development aspects. So anyway, that needs to be reworded. And then I think on page 3 of 3, second paragraph, I think that was Emil's question, and Emil just needs to look at it and make sure it's worded correctly. It's about the minimum and maximum floor height from the ground. That's, again, third page, second paragraph.
Any other comments?
That was it.
I think given the number of changes, we should forward, everyone should forward their comments to Mark, and then we will reconsider the minutes from April 8th at our next meeting. Okay, the minutes from April 29th. Do I have a motion?
Oh, I make a motion to accept the minutes from April 20, oh, so we're tabling the other motion? Is that
Yeah,
what's happening?
yeah.
Okay. I make a motion to accept the minutes from April 29th with
Do I have a
some
second?
amendments.
Second.
Any discussion?
I just noticed that when we had votes, they didn't have the name of the person who made the motion and what the actual motion was. I mean, when we voted for you, it said we voted Marnie chair unanimously, but we didn't have. So I went through and I sent these to Mark already. I couldn't find who made the motion for the carriage lane. My understanding with Robert's rules is you don't have to have the person who seconded, just the person who made the motion. So I sent all those on to Mark.
So those amendments are relatively minor. Would the board consider approving these minutes subject to those specific corrections that you sent to Mark? Or would you prefer we'll just revisit these at the same time as April 8th?
Doesn't matter to me, whatever everybody wants to do.
You probably should wait.
We'll wait, okay. So we'll take these minutes up at our next meeting.
Great.
Okay, if the planning board members have no objection, I think I will skip to the A&R request that we have received. That should take a minimal amount of time, and I don't want to keep this gentleman waiting.
Thank you very much. My name is Richard Kalman. I'm a practicing attorney that for the last 35 years way up north in Ipswich. And in all of my years, I've never had an opportunity to come before this board, but I thank you for going out of order, because it seems like we've got some heavy lifting to do tonight. So what's before you tonight is an A&R plan. Oh, great, thank you for putting that on the screen. Before I go into the specifics of the plan, I'll just tell you, I am representing the owners of both. The parcel and the building and the land at 305 Willow Street is owned by Welch and Lamson, Inc., and that's where the oil business operates out of. And 323 is owned by a trust and has a different ownership than the ownership. It is still family, but has a different ownership than the oil business next door. And I did not know how well known this family is, but evidently the Lamsons go back many, many years, and maybe about 75 years with the oil business. And I can now say that they have decided to sell. That word has not gotten on the street. It is certainly now public. They are selling to another local North Shore oil company, and hopefully the closing will occur next month. So what can happen when you've got two parcels owned by family for so many years, and they have been owned together, is the family was a little lackadaisical on buildings that actually crossed lines. You can actually see on this A&R plan there's a hatched line where the current boundary is between 323 and 305. And, they just never knew that they had built them that way until, you come to sell a family business and the real estate, I should say. They are selling the business and the real estate. You get a survey done, and lo and behold, you discover that the property line runs right through the building at 323. And so this A&R was actually brought to Richard Maloney by me several months ago. And he said, Rich, look, it's fine. There's no zoning. You won't create any non-compliance issue because the zoning for the business district is so loose as far as setbacks, et cetera. But in preparation for tonight, I realized, well, you could have some questions. Because it was so many months ago that I spoke to him about this, and then there were months of negotiations about the actual sale of the land and the building, that kind of, forgot about how unusual this would be to come before you. So it is not your typical A&R. This is to clean up title matters so that they can actually sell the real estate. The land that will be sold, and the building is just at 305. So the proposal is to create a new property line, a boundary line, which runs exactly along the outline of the buildings. And that way, and you can see it's the darker line. That way now 323 will be entirely on the building at 323, will be entirely on the parcel at 323. And actually then the second thing that's occurring is there is a little parcel that the MBTA sold that's at the back of 323, and actually you can see down the bottom it says Mass Bay Transportation Authority. There is a little piece that was actually purchased by Welch and Lamson instead of the trust that owns 323. So this A&R will be a combination of this little strip that I have outlined on another plan if you want to see it. That strip is going to be conveyed from 305 Welch and Lamson over to 323, because the parcel's always been used by 323, and they just didn't even realize it was owned by Welch and Lamson and not owned by the trust. So this is the housekeeping that can occur when you've had property in a family for as long as with that, maybe I'll just, I can take any questions you have, but I was looking at your zoning and I realized these are, I think, what you would call irregular shaped lots. And your zoning does say that when there are irregular shaped lots, if you reconfigure them, it's in conjunction with the building inspector and the planning board. And I'll confess that I didn't, really look at that until getting ready for tonight's meeting. But So if you're looking for Richard Maloney, I'm just going to say to approve this. All I can say is I emailed him this months ago and spoke with him about it, as did the broker who was handling it. And he blessed it, and that's why it kind of slipped into the rearview mirror while the rest of the negotiations went on. And now, since the closing is approaching, now we're finally getting to come before you with this A&R. I could have come, obviously, months earlier, but as things just dragged on, we wanted to make sure that it was going forward, and so now there is this cleanup. To create a new boundary, and there'll be a new boundary line agreement where the two parties agree that this line will become, the line of the actual building will become the new property line. So with that, that's my presentation, and if you have any questions, I'll do my best.
So I know this was sort of a pre-existing condition, but with no separation between the buildings, if there's change of use or substantial improvement to one building or the other, the question is, has that been thought through, sort of building separation issues, building code issues, speaking of the building inspector?
That's a very good question. I can't speak for the buyer of the oil business, but from what I know, and I can certainly mention that to them, they have no plans to make any changes. This is a common wall that already exists between those two buildings.
Oh, yep.
So whether it meets today's current codes, I don't know, but the common wall has always been the common wall between the two buildings. We're just, and up in Ipswich, obviously, you have a lot of older homes that are attached, and they literally have the property line right down the middle, and you have house on the left and house on the right. This would be similar to that situation that you'd find in a lot of colonial era towns, but now you'd have the similar here, two buildings that literally share a common wall at various points on the boundary.
What is
The consideration here is that, I guess the adjacency of two maybe not very, well, putting an oil company next to a lumber yard, I guess you could question, isn't that Dodge Tree right there?
You know what? I'm not as familiar with what's at 323.
Okay.
I'll confess to that. As much as I've driven past.
Isn't that that's the garage, isn't it?
Is it just
It's the garage. They don't actually store a lot of lumber there.
Okay.
I see where you're going, but they're not piles of lumber sitting out there
And that's, I know I'm not.
waiting to have oil spilled on them and catch fire.
I thought it was an automotive repair.
It is the automotive.
No, that's to the north.
Because
That's 323.
there has been now, there's a brand new septic system that just went in a couple weeks ago. That is an upgrade. And they're doing some new piping for the underground tanks. Those were examined very carefully, obviously, by the buyer to be sure there were no issues that they could be inheriting, and they were found to be leak-free. But nonetheless, it was a recommendation by a company that does this that says, a couple of those pipes ought to be changed over now just because they really aren't the way we would do them today. But no leaks were found. There's monitoring wells that are going in, so there's a lot of environmental due diligence occurring literally as we speak. But nothing has been found that's problematic, and the septic system went in a couple of weeks ago.
So you were saying that this is going to be sold to another oil company with the same intentions
Correct,
of
same
use?
intention, that's right, yep.
And nothing else being built on that property?
No.
Okay.
So this is currently in the Willow Street Overlay District, right?
Excuse me?
Willow Street Overlay District
yes.
is and the underlying zoning is business?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I'm just looking on the use categories, and the use of, what would the use be for an oil facility like that you're
Well,
talking about?
Here's the thing, I didn't study what exact use this would be, only because it would be potentially a pre-existing non-conforming use that has existed and there's no change in the use. But, so, I'm not here to say, gee, that is a conforming use today. I imagine most towns would not have an oil company right in the downtown.
But there are virtually no setbacks along a lot of that property.
That's true, but it was Richard Maloney that said, Rich, excuse me, because my name's Rich. He said, Mr. Maloney, who I checked with, said, well, there really is total discretion. There is discretion in this business district, and he did not see any issues that I would have to go before the zoning board or anything. But I understand, I had those conversations months ago. Now it's before you. I look at the zoning, and I would certainly say this: if you felt that we should have a consultation with Richard Maloney, just to feel comfortable, because now that I read the zoning, that it says for irregular lots, the front or rear lines, for purposes of computing the minimum width and depth, shall be decided by the building commissioner after consultation with the planning board. I assume that didn't happen. He simply said, Rich, I don't see an issue with how you're dividing this. And so if you feel that there's some more due diligence, I recognize that. I'm not here to just say, hey, sign. And I recognized it more tonight simply because, again, this was so many months ago that the process started on selling the business. And you kind of do things in a certain order, and now we're getting this done. So, if that's the feeling of the board, that you'd like to do some more homework on that, I certainly would understand.
I'm sorry, that sale's complete?
Nope, no, it's supposed to be in July. We're hoping for July.
So forgive my ignorance, with the zoning change in that area changing, does that impact how the use is going forward?
No,
think so.
because it's not adopted.
It's not adopted.
Right, but it hasn't been sold yet, so depending on the timing of that, does that?
But it doesn't look like even the use with the Willow Street is allowable.
Under the current guidelines, under the current bylaws?
Under the current bylaws. So it's rendered, I think, non-conforming at the outset here.
Pre-existing non-conforming.
Yeah, but if there's no
pre-existing.
change to it, then it's grandfathered.
Yeah.
Right.
But if they're, back to what I was saying, if there was a change of use or a substantial improvement, then it would be a different story.
Understood, 100%. There's Boston Council handling this for the buyers. So they have a good, solid counsel that would advise them if they did decide to make any improvements.
And 323, the garages, they just changed hands.
Well, I'm sure it's a tenant because it's owned by a Lamson family member.
Right, okay. And
So-
the
So
they're
tenant,
renting it, yeah.
Yes, that's been rented for a long time.
Right, but it's a new tenant because there were two different people there. And I know this because the old tenant did car registrations, and I went to get my car registered. It's like they don't do it anymore. It's a new guy.
I know there was Sergeant was there at one time.
Oh, Joey Sargent was at the place on Asbury.
Okay.
Yeah, because I knew Joey Sargent, yeah.
I just figured that's on that corner. It must have.
No, he was on the corner of, Asbury and the tracks. There's another building behind 323.
Oh.
And I think
Okay.
the fellow
I see.
there now
Thank
is
you. I get it now.
is John.
Okay, got it.
So there's a new tenant at 323, and I don't know the relationship with the other garage that, his name's John.
As I said, I can't speak to that, only came in tonight trying to see if we could divide.
Right, well, I don't see any issues with the A&R at this point because there is no change of use. So it is, as Jonathan said, it's grandfathered in.
And I don't see the need to further talk to Rich or
Right,
Maloney, or I
no.
don't think we need to advise Rich.
But down the road,
Yes,
Yeah,
you know,
for-
there's the potential for,
absolutely. I understand that, yep.
And they're aware that the
Yes.
proposed zoning is quite a bit tighter. So they have protections as a pre-existing non-conforming, but these would be quite non-conforming, so there's not much they can.
Understood.
Okay.
No change of use. I think this oil company has already been kind of a customer or getting oil from actually from the Lamsons. So they've been expanding. I don't want to give their name out, but they've bought up other oil companies, at least one other. But they're totally familiar with the property because one of the benefits, I guess, of this site is the amount of oil that they actually have that the Lamsons can sell to third-party trucks that come through. So the oil company that's purchasing it has actually been a long-term customer of filling their trucks at this site.
Well, I'll entertain a motion to approve the A&R application based on the representations of Attorney Coleman.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
So when I call your name, please indicate whether you approve of this A&R. Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Herr,
Aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. Good to go.
Thank you very much. I don't know, as I head into a retirement in about a month, I don't think I'll be back again, but thank you very much.
Enjoy your
Happy
retirement.
retirement.
Well, thanks. It's going to be easier said than done.
I'm sure there are probably openings on different boards and commissions in Ipswich that would love to.
Or you can move to
Love to have
Hamilton
your
and we can
services.
recruit them for here. So,
Thank you very much.
Plan to sign.
What?
We have plans to sign there.
Oh, plans to sign over there.
Yes. Okay.
Mark, we'll have to sign those plans
Yes,
before we leave.
Before we leave.
Yep.
Before we leave, okay. Okay, then now we can turn to the continuation of our public hearing on the zoning bylaw amendments. And at our last meeting, we requested additional edits to the town center zoning, and we also wanted to see drafts of the warrant articles and the appendices. So we got those documents, I believe, yesterday?
352.
Yesterday at 3:52. So we have not had a lot of time to review these documents, and they're not easy to sort out. I would have to say that. And I thought that it would be difficult to pull the town center zoning apart for the purposes of the majority vote on the 3A districts and the Depot Square and the Bay Road Civic. And I think that my assessment was accurate, not so much the taking it apart, but understanding how it comes together. And so I went through this morning, and I had a whole series of questions, and I'm perfectly happy to be told that I don't understand what I'm looking at, but I struggled because I didn't know what amendments to our zoning bylaw would be incorporated. Would it be the proposed amendments that are dated June 11th? Because, as you recall, from when we did our zoning amendments, we did something analogous to this, and that was part of the appendix to the warrant. And so I looked at these proposed amendments dated June 11th, and I noted that they did not include changes to site plan review, section 10.6. And the other thing about the proposed amendments, on the first page, page 1 of 19, in a box, it says, insert the following to the table of contents under section 9.0 special district regulations. Well, that's correct. So now that the appendices exist the way they exist, I went through them and I was completely confused about the status of the business district. I would have to say that. I mean, it's been deleted in the proposed amendments in its entirety. But a business district can still exist in Hamilton, just not in the town center. So I wondered why we wanted to eliminate it. But I don't believe it was eliminated in Appendix A. Okay, so I'm not sure how we should proceed here. I don't know. You know, I know, Robin, you and Mark have been communicating. If you want to give us an overview of how this is supposed to work, I think that would be helpful. But if I am confused, if I struggled trying to put this together, and I had almost 2 pages of comments and questions, then I can safely say that the citizens of Hamilton will have absolutely no idea what any of this means. Does anyone want to contest that?
Why don't we hear from Robin? So,
But I mean, I couldn't put it together, much as I tried. And so I understand why it's the way it is, absolutely. But I couldn't understand, say, for example, if something's in Appendix B, with respect to the form-based code, does that carry over when both are adopted to the 3A subdistricts? In a nutshell.
So, good evening, everyone. You know me, but Robin Stein from KP Law, we're your town council, and particularly I work on a lot of your land use issues. We've been working with the town on this matter. As I think all of you know, the process for amending the zoning bylaw amendment lives in general law, chapter 48, section 5. A couple years back, you know, at the time that was sooner than it was, but a couple years ago, the legislature made a change to that section to allow zoning bylaw amendments that allow for a certain number of uses to be adopted by a majority vote instead of the normal 2/3 vote. And one of the uses that you may adopt zoning bylaw amendments to allow is multifamily housing in eligible location. Eligible location is a term defined in general law, chapter 48, section 1A, and we have already determined that the new proposed overlay district, as well as the new proposed town center districts that will be contributing to 3A compliance adopted by the town are eligible locations. So then the town could adopt zoning districts that allow for multifamily housing by majority vote. The statute also provides that matters to be adopted by majority vote should not be combined with matters that have to be adopted by the traditional 2/3 vote. So our recommendation, whenever possible, is that you divide those up. While it certainly was a time-consuming task, it was conceptually not that difficult to figure it out. And I think, I wanted to give you an opportunity to explain how it works and how it's set up. It's going to answer many of the questions that you gave us. I'm happy to go through those. So, the other thing is that 3A compliance, can have consequences, complying or not for a community. And so, I think that it is appropriate that you pass it, that you send it to the meeting on the standard, because that's what the statute contemplates. And, it's appropriate to give it to that. And so the direction that I've had from the town is to put together, warrant articles that will accomplish all of your zoning bylaw amendments with the things that belong in a majority article and things that belong in a 2/3 article and a 2/3 article. And I've done my best to put that together for the town and all of you. Like Mark and Joe and everyone can review it and get it in good shape so that it can go forward the way that is consistent with the statute. And that's what I've done here. And I'll just explain to you conceptually what we've done here. So we have the majority items will be in the first of the 2 warrant articles.
Right.
And normally the way that we approach, when you have multiple articles within a warrant, that are going to amend zoning bylaws. The one that goes first, if that passes, is effective. So that's in place. Then your second article is literally adding to or amending that first article. And it definitely can be confusing, but that's the concept. So we're going to have a warrant with 2 articles. The first article is going to be anything that can be by majority vote. So basically allowing and regulating multifamily housing as a part. And the things that go along with that, both the new overlay and the 3 districts that are contributing to your 3A compliance. So the downtown residential, the Willow Street mixed use, and the Bay Road mixed use. And then the other 2 districts we'll deal with in the separate article because that's allow multifamily as a right. So the high-level concept is collectively, this is your entire amendment. And I can just tell you what came to me. I think I got originally, maybe it was last Monday night, complete 50-page document was the whole thing, so that I could split it up. I split that up. I turned it around for Tuesday, so the select board can have it meeting last Tuesday, and then since then, and you guys met. Or I'm sorry, yep, Tuesday, then you met Wednesday and got some additional comments and changes after your last meeting, which was after the last select board meeting. And then working with Mark, we then incorporated those into the documents that they've already been split up. Because once they're split, we really can't go back to the complete document again and keep splitting it. So we've incorporated it here. So what these 2 documents together should represent is the intent of the planning board for the town, that everything passes collectively. This is your full zoning bylaw.
So that's Appendix A and B.
Together, yeah.
So it is not the town center.
Collectively it is. So what I did is I took, so you had essentially a 50-page zoning bylaw amendment. Because again, you're not just doing this for 3A compliance, you're rezoning your entire downtown, which is different than most communities. Most communities are just doing one 3A overlay or 3A overlay with a couple of sub-districts and they're adding it in. They're not rezoning everything. So you're doing it in a way that just, it requires a little more heavy lifting because you're doing a whole lot more with this than just as a part of multifamily. And so we have to pay a little bit more attention to the quantums of vote, because if all you were doing was adopting zoning that was multifamily as of right, you were doing 1 majority article. So again, so again, what I received is a whole amendment. And what I did is then, almost like surgery, split it into 2. We said, this is all the majority material, everything that is be adopted by majority vote, and we can go through that. And once that's voted yes at town meeting, then you move to the second article, and that's voted yes, then your whole amendment is accomplished. And the whole thing goes.
Okay.
The way it reads, to clarify your point, because I know it's one of your questions, is it presumes this order is A gets adopted, and then B is adding to it amending A. It's not repeating anything because A has already been adopted.
Okay.
And because you couldn't put things in B that belong in A, because that's 2 words. So it's collectively together gets you the whole amendment.
Right, and then the whole amendment is going to be the proposed amendments. That's the 5th draft, section 25, June 11th, 2025, along with section 9.8, the town center zoning, and 9.7.
So, well, I can't specifically substantively answer that question. What I can tell you is I received the 5th draft, I split it up. My understanding is you had questions since then. I spoke with Emil. There were additional changes suggested by Emil to the nonconformities language. That's been incorporated in here. So ultimately, I split up what I was given, and this represents the most recent version of all of the changes that I was given. I split it up and I gave it back to you. I highly recommend that you all read it. You make sure that this is right. You make sure this has everything that you want in it. Because you know substantively better than me. But what I can tell you from a process perspective is that I took what I received and I split it up, and then there was one more round of modifications and changes made to this based on additional comments I got from Mark and from discussion with Emil specifically on the nonconformities part. And so I'm happy to walk through with you, and I honestly think it's going to answer most of your questions.
Right, I think that would be a good thing,
Sure.
but from what you've just said, it's absolutely imperative that something be added to the warrant as an appendix or something, a narrative of how Appendix A and Appendix B work together. Because if you just look at the 2 documents and try and repeat what you just said in your own mind, it is not clear.
Yeah,
at all.
what you just said was very clear, and
What
so we
you
could
said
get that
is
in
clear,
words. Yeah,
but I did
we
not
could get that in
infer that.
written terms.
So two things. There's a spot in the warrant for explanation, and I expect
Yes.
that's going to be added there.
Yes, yes.
And I expect that Mark or any of you folks at town meeting are going to talk to that. I will also be at town meeting, so I can also answer questions there. But the warrant has a section of explanation, so an explanation we're going to put in the warrant. We've been focused on the article part of this part, just to make sure that there's so many changes. There's something to really make sure we have the right things in the right places. And so, for example, I can walk through with you what we did in A, what we did in B, and why, and you guys can ask me all of your questions. I know it's daunting, and obviously I did it, so it all makes sense to me, and now I'm going to help it make sense to you. But I do think ultimately it does make sense. And we've just been trying to be respectful of the fact that the law has this split now that
Right, and that part of it is completely understandable to me. I get that 100%. But how they work together was much less clear to me. And if I had had a narrative of what you just said, it would have made sense. I would have understood it better because, say, for example, the nonconformities, here they are in Appendix B, and I'm thinking, do they then apply to the 3A zones? And your answer to that is yes.
They will once they're all adopted. And
Right, but that wasn't clear when I was reviewing.
And I can tell you, for example, largely that went in the 2/3 because, one, when you're talking about non-conforming uses, as allowed as a right, you won't be regulating non-conforming as a right, as a non-conformity, so we put it in the 2/3 article.
Right.
Because it would not present uses.
Maybe what Marty's getting at there is, are these two standalone articles to vote on? So if one gets voted down.
Well, I was just going to, I was curious about that, too.
Okay.
You want to make sure everyone's clear.
Yeah.
So the way that it's set up, and I do think the way that makes sense is to go majority 2/3, right?
Yeah.
And, part of this, while you want the whole thing, is 3A compliance. So the way that this is set up is Appendix A is all your multifamily 3A compliance language. So if this is adopted, this will be in place. For some reason, this passes by majority vote, and then the things in the B, in Appendix B, don't pass by the 2/3 vote. The only changes you'll have will be the things that have to do with the multifamily. And I'll just for an example, we'll go through all of it. You can't adopt allowing single-family housing as a right by a majority vote. So that whole use table, all the other things that you're allowing besides multifamily have to go in the 2/3 article.
Right.
So, the goal is, right, for the town is if this goes forward to town meeting, the whole thing gets approved, because you want the comprehensive change, right? But if you only end up with A, then you're only gonna have A. And if A fails, I think you're gonna end up wanting to pass over B, because you're not gonna have the framework for B without A.
That answered my next question.
Yeah, I was wondering what happens
Thank you.
if,
Thank you.
So if A fails, I think in the end, you're gonna end up referring B back to the planning board for further study.
Yeah.
Because A, for example, is putting in place the town center district, but only the 3 that go into your 3A compliance, because they're the 3 multifamily housing as a right. So a lot of the Form A stuff is the general stuff that's going to apply to those 3 districts is coming in with it. And then in B, we're adding the other 2 districts.
It almost feels like there could be almost a little diagram that accompanies this for the voters to understand.
I'm sure we can work with Mark to
Yeah,
put,
a very simple diagram.
together
Yeah.
that kind of gives the highlights of what
Yeah.
we're opting for one versus
Yeah,
the other.
it really would have been extremely helpful because as I said, I understood what you were trying to do, but not the actual ramifications of
right,
B as an amendment to A.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
that's really the only way that I can conceive of doing it, one, because zoning.
Well, it
says-
makes sense. Now that you say it, it makes sense.
And
It's
we'll-
just,
And that's why I'm here tonight, right? I'm here tonight to help you all get comfortable with it. You're gonna meet again in a week, so you're gonna have some more time with it, regular joint meeting, and move the select board on the 24th. So, the goal tonight is to do this, is to do this exercise, is to help you understand it all, and then, if you have any questions between now and then, I'm around, we can reach out
so
to me.
what would the process be say if that first article fails, then one of the planning board members would make a suggestion that it gets referred back?
Anybody can make a motion, but yeah, I would expect that you would have either a planning board or select board or somebody prepared to make a motion, usually for zoning, we recommend just make a motion to refer it back to the
Planning board, right.
study, and keep the continuity of it, but you're not going, if A fails, you won't have really the framework to do
Okay.
missing
Parts of it, right,
parts of
right,
it.
right.
And there are literally things in B that are amending things you just did in A, and so they wouldn't be there to amend. It wouldn't work. If they really
Got it.
go together, and obviously I think you're both, you want all of it. I mean, you don't
Right.
want A without B. But we have to get it in somehow.
Got it.
So with a motion, who votes on it? Everybody at the town meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then is that to refer it back to planning board on B? Would that be because it's a 2/3 majority vote on that it would be 2/3 majority or a simple majority to go back to?
Refer back is just a majority.
Okay,
Because you're
great.
not approving it.
Right,
So
right,
if it
right.
didn't, if that vote didn't pass, what would happen then? If the motion to refer it back to, I know these are stupid questions, but I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here.
I mean, I guess it would depend on what other motion.
So-
I mean, I think it would be unlikely that if A does not get a majority vote, right? So then a majority of people aren't going to say, well, send B back. But if B-
I understand it's counterintuitive. I'm just asking.
Yeah, I mean, so if the planning board recommends approval of both of these, and say A fails, and then B doesn't get referred back and it fails, you'll still be able to revisit B later, so long as the planning board recommends approval, you won't have the 2-year ban.
Okay.
We won't have a 2-year ban because,
So in 48.5, there's language that says essentially that town meeting can't act on something that has failed
right.
for a 2-year period unless it had a favorable recommendation. So if this board recommends that the amendment, basically that the zoning bylaw amendment be adopted by town meeting, and there's a failure, then you should be able to bring back substantially the same article within 2 years because you had the planning board recommendation.
So, and that would be a majority on the planning board recommending.
Majority vote for the planning
Yep.
board recommendation, yes.
That all makes sense.
We're learning all sorts of things.
I feel bad
Look
for.
forward to your presentation at town meeting.
I'm not gonna lie, it was a time-consuming exercise, but more because I really wanted to make sure the details were attended to.
I got a PowerPoint show you can follow.
We have, yeah.
I feel like
Minimum
I
of
have
30
a
slides.
pointer and things, but I'm happy to go through it and kind of explain the rationale to you. And
Yeah.
answer any questions.
Yeah, and there were actually, I know in Appendix A, there was a problem. There were, Table 1 was reproduced as Table 2, I believe. They're identical.
Let's go through it, and we'll look at it, and we can talk about it, and we'll take whatever time you guys need to get comfortable with it, and then if there's additional questions or anything we don't get to tonight, reach out to me in the meantime, individually, and I'm happy to talk about it. So, you tell me if it's easier, do you want, I personally think looking at these, it's easier to have both of them in front of you, and kind of compare what's in the one versus the other, not go through like all of A and all of B, but however you want to do it is fine with me.
I think side by side's easier.
Okay, yeah, so let's put
Everybody agree with that?
down, but unless we need the file, I'm not gonna do that, and we'll just go through them together. So, just starting with the table of contents, I left, adding the 3A and the town center district in the table of contents, because those are for regulation of multifamily, those are ways to multifamily housing. If you look at changes to 2.1, and so on the watching on the screen is Appendix A.
Yeah.
So in Appendix A, you would be adding favor of mixed use, Willow Street mixed use, and downtown residential, because those are districts where multifamily housing is allowed as of right. You're not touching the business district here because there will be, if only A is adopted, there will still be part of that purple business district on your zoning map.
That would be the Depot Square area.
Exactly, because
Yeah.
business district doesn't get rezoned
Yeah.
to Depot until Appendix B. So,
Got it.
So business district is Appendix A.
That would have been clear if you, in your zoning map, had put in that as a business district.
It is.
Not that one, the next.
Well, so the map.
The next map.
Show the existing
That one.
district, and then they show the rezoned district.
Because there actually is another zone there that's not colored. That's was confusing.
Oh, maybe you guys can connect on that and talk to.
But those, the colored zones are the ones that are
They're the only 3A.
supporting 3A.
Yep, so the first map in there shows your existing.
But this bylaw is for all the zones.
So that would be in the appendix B?
So, no. If you
Okay.
look in A, there's two maps.
Got it.
The first map, which has a purple district,
Yep.
that's showing your existing zone.
Yep,
The second map is just showing the new district.
got it.
So this lower area, the Main Street and the shopping center, that zoning wouldn't change if just A passed, it would
Stays
stay
business.
business.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is the business and
So that's why we left business in, because we still have parts of business. So if you look at Appendix B, going side by side, that's where you'll see that business is being deleted, and Depot Square and Bay Road are being added. Now, Marty, to your question, business district is a specific district. And if you look at your current zoning map, I believe the only place the business district exists is right there in that purple. And so it is being completely rezoned.
Right. For some reason, it sticks in my mind that we had a business district at Chewbacca Road.
There's an overlay.
Commercial overlay.
It was a commercial overlay.
Say.
Oh, okay, that was my confusion.
I think you can check that question.
Yeah, that was my problem. I had, that stuck in my mind. So our business,
It's a commercial.
right, and so even though we eliminate this business district, we can still have a commercial overlay district anywhere else in town if and when it was ever thought to be a good idea.
So if you look at 2.3, Marty, in B, well, either one, you'll see the reference to commercial overlay district, that's not changing.
Right, exactly. Okay, so it's something stuck in my mind about that business district. So now it's making sense.
And if you look at 2.3 and A, you'll see that also being added is the 3A multifamily overlay district, which is like the hashed at the top. So that's getting all your new districts. So then when we go to 252, which is split lots, and this is a good example of where A is used for in A. So we just added a sentence in A that clarifies that, because so for district boundaries, we distinguish residential and business. So we add a sentence that just clarifies what constitutes a residential, what constitutes a business district, as between Bay Road mixed use, Willow Street, and downtown residential. So for those purposes, we add them. When you go over and you look at Appendix B, we clean that up a little bit more to clarify, RA1 or R1B in downtown residential, and then the others. And that was my understanding, that was your ultimate intent, was to have it read as it's shown in B.
She was concerned about.
Why don't you ask, because I don't know if I can track.
Jump in.
Can we pass an overlay district with only half,
Was 50%.
with 50%?
Oh, no.
So because you can, because the purpose of the overlay district is to create a district in which.
Multifamily housing, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't
So
understand the
because
question.
the only use in that district is adding right multifamily, yes, it's a majority vote. So you can create the district.
So
right
if we broke this up into, we identify new areas in town, not all of downtown, but the 3 areas that we want, and we identify them as part of the multifamily overlay district, which is just going to allow 15 units per acre.
They're not part of the multifamily overlay district. You're creating an overlay district.
I understand that, but if we create an overlay district, which is the Asbury Street area, and also 3 areas downtown.
As underlying zoning districts.
No, I'm going to apply the overlay district to those 3 areas.
So you're suggesting a different approach than what?
That's right, so that we can meet our 3A obligations in 2 parts of town, 3 areas downtown, 1 area out in Asbury Street, with a simple overlay district that has sort of minimum heights and maximum thises, and, doesn't get into much detail. It could probably be 3 or 4 pages. And you put that before the board, before the town, you only need 50% for that.
So yes, mean, you could have not gone with this approach. You could have taken your existing zoning map, and you could have said, we're just gonna add a 3A multifamily overlay district.
In this part of town, at 3A, over here. Now, we need to decide on things like, maximum building and setbacks and a few other things like that, but it's not, doesn't have anything to do with, okay. And then what we say is, downtown is actually really complicated, because you can't, there's so many little existing uses and shops and everything else, and we think we would rather, we want the overlay on that now, but we think we want to replan that much more carefully with form-based code. And so we're going to have to require a 2/3 vote?
Likely, because
Likely.
if you're adding anything else there later that isn't one of the things that 48.5 lets you do by majority vote, then
Right.
it's a 2/3 vote.
Right. But I think that would clarify things, and I think once people saw that we'd met our 3A requirements, but we really want to sort of more overplan the downtown, then we have another, let's just call it form-based zoning for downtown. And that will require 2/3.
So that's certainly an approach that the town, or this board could have taken, but it's not the approach you did take. And
I understand that, but I'm trying to get something done very simply to meet 3A. And I'm afraid that there's an awful lot of material here dealing with an awful lot of details about only one of these areas, which is downtown.
Well, is a overlay district mandatory, or is it?
Yes, that's mandatory.
No, it isn't.
Well-
That's the problem. That you can, that the homeowner.
We could change the underlying zoning and achieve it that way. It's the minimum way of meeting 3A.
So 3A simply requires that you have to have a zone
Yeah.
that allows for as of right multifamily with the right dimensional requirements. As I said, many communities, not all, but many, have done that through just a new overlay, where they've overlaid the district. You have chosen to do that by rezoning your entire downtown and adding an overlay district. And so, to be clear, that how you do that is certainly not my call. It's something you could do. I'm simply working within the papers I received and the directions I received from the town.
I understand, but legally speaking, do you think it would be easier to meet all of our 3A requirements with an overlay district that covered both areas and only required a 50% vote, and then got into the weeds about all the detailed designs in the downtown district, rezoning that in depth, which would require 2/3?
So that may have been a more straightforward approach had that been the approach the town took originally. But at this point in the process, it sounds like you're saying start over.
No, Bill.
No, thank you. Marty says no.
Without seeing exactly what that.
I want to get something passed. I'm afraid that 50 pages of detailed planning documents are not going to, they're certainly not going to get 2/3. And I doubt if they would get 1/2, and I'm trying to break it up into something simple that everybody understands, which is we have to meet our 3A obligation, and we're going to do a lot of other towns. We're going to pass an overlay district. And then when we look at our downtown, we realize, well, it really needs a little more guidance. So we're going to bring another bill, we're going to bring another town meeting. At the next town meeting, we're going to come back with some details about how to do this much more carefully.
Respectfully, I don't think that's a question for me.
No, and Bill, I think the ship sailed, number one, and number two, I think that the 3A zones have a much, much better chance of passing with the form-based code than without. Because the form-based code that we now have, assuming both pass, puts parameters around the deleterious effect of the 3A zones. So I think once we have a narrative so that people understand the relationship between these appendices, I think that the volume will not be an issue. We need, the citizens need the explanation. I think that should be in the warrant, not an appendix. So I retract my earlier statement. Yeah, it has to be in the warrant. Then they'll understand that the form-based code is what's going to enable the town to be protected from any of the adverse consequences of unregulated.
I think there's actually quite a lot of protection in the overlay district at the densities required once you introduce setbacks and maximum building sizes, and you can get a downtown that looks not much different than what we already have. I mean, I think that's possible just within those simple guidelines.
I don't think it's possible as a practical matter at this point in time, given that we have a special town meeting scheduled for July. I just don't think we can start over.
I agree about the timing. I'll wager you a quarter on whether this goes through in the current format.
Well, you know, I think that's up in the air.
I think there will be bewilderment.
I would just say, last thing on this is, if A passes by itself, B doesn't pass, I mean, we meet the 3A requirements. And that Article 2 is the non-controversial parts of this, I think. The form is mostly non-controversial, so, you know, I think we have a higher chance of meeting that 2/3 threshold. I can't guarantee it, but, so that's sort of where this is coming from. Wenham just passed 3A with 2/3. They had one article, they got the 2/3 requirement. It is a much simpler code, but I think there's a reasonable chance that this will.
You think everybody's going to be able to appreciate the value of the form-based code?
Yes.
And that, as Marnie believes, that will help push through the 3A.
I think you're challenged either way, but if you go this way, at least you have protections if it does passes. That's my input.
I would agree with that statement.
What if we passed a 3A overlay? You're afraid we don't have enough protection downtown?
We don't have as much protection, and we don't have as much.
I agree, we don't have
cohesion.
as much protection.
But we don't have as much
if you look at
cohesion.
the setbacks and the parking requirements and a few other things that are allowed to be used in the overlay district, we can hem it in pretty tightly without
I would
worry
disagree with
about
that.
big, tall
with the by
apartment
right, I'm
buildings
not-
or shopping centers or anything else.
I'm not convinced with by right, by is right. As
Is
by right.
Matthew on here?
Yes.
Why don't we ask
The only thing that has to be by right is the units per acre. Am I not correct legally?
You have to allow.
No, you need the area.
housing
Multi-family housing at 15 units per acre.
Within the parameter.
But we can also, those parameters can include setbacks and heights and building sizes and so on.
If those can accomplish the 15
Yeah.
units per acre.
Why don't we ask Matthew? He's, I believe, on
Yeah.
the call.
If what?
Matthew from UTL.
Your consultant.
Yes.
What's the question? I'm sorry.
What did you want to ask him? Or who wants to ask what?
Well, the question, Matthew, came up, Bill was asking whether, rather than doing a form-based code, this could have been done as an overlay district in the downtown. Well, Bill, why don't you ask the question?
My question was, could we get, let's say, 3/4 of the protection that we get with the form-based code by just having fairly strict requirements on lot coverage ratios, heights, maximum building sizes, a few things like that? That would be that you'd put into a normal overlay district, or you could in this case.
Yeah, you could put in almost all of the same dimensional parameters that we have specified because those go into the model anyway. So yes, setbacks, FAR, height, all of those things could go into an overlays. If this were structured as an overlay zone, yes, it could.
And that would, give us less design control than we would get with form-based code, but it would make a significant control.
Yeah, there are 3A compliant zonings that, I don't know what a form-based overlay code would look like. It would be a little odd, but yeah, dimensionally, you could apply a lot of controls and still have it be an overlay.
Okay.
I think what you lose, and I think this was the intention from the start, was that the new zoning would be more fundamentally corrective and eliminate some of the, the less desirable choices that would still be available in the underlying zoning.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Okay, so just an example, and you're going to see these a few times in here. If you look at section 252, which is split lots, based on the information I received, my understanding that ultimately you want this to read as it is in Appendix B. We need temporary changes in Appendix A that are the most, I think, you find majority vote. That would be suitable and helpful if older Appendix A passes, but they'll literally be momentary as B passes. So A makes the first round of changes we can make, B gets you where you want to be.
Takes it out.
And you'll see that in a few places in here. It's real clear, like basic example, one building on the other. So that's those. So then we get down to the table of use regulations. Essentially, for A, you just have a narrative. You're going to amend your table of use regulations so that you add columns for Baylor, which is Ministry of Administration of Downtown Residential Subdistricts. And you're going to add a new use after A7, it'll be A8, which is multifamily dwelling. And that's going to be a use that's allowed by right only in those districts. And then that'll be the only use allowed by right in those districts for purposes of A, because that's the only thing we can adopt by majority vote. When you come over to B, that's when you'll see the full comprehensive use table that has everything else.
Right.
Okay, got it. But it's, what made this unclear to me is that last part, which begins with which use, is the only use allowed in those three districts. So that, when I read that, it didn't mean,
I stumbled over that as well.
there should be another word in there that,
Yeah.
It's which use is the only, so, I mean, right, we could say, and which multifamily use.
Actually, multifamily use is only allowed in those 3A
Yeah.
districts, so that's the intent here.
that's the intent.
Let me just, it's two things, right? So multifamily use is only allowed in those districts. And by A, it's the only use allowed in those districts. Because you can't adopt the other uses in those districts by majority vote. You have to adopt them in B. You cannot add, for example, single-family housing as of right in the downtown residential district by majority vote. That
So-
has to be accomplished in
But it already exists. That's
No, it
the,
doesn't, because you're rezoning the district.
So if
It
the
exists
second
as
one,
a-
that is something that I fell over. I did not follow
I
that.
explain it very easily.
Well, I get it now, but it's not clear at all.
You are creating a new district,
yep,
so the old district doesn't exist in that land, and then you're saying what you can do in that district. And I don't know another way, keep it being respectful of the 2/3 versus majority division, than to do it any other way than to say, we've created 3 new districts, and in those districts, you may have multifamily housing as of right, and that is it. It's almost like they're an overlay, but they're not. And then in B, you can reintroduce everything else you do or don't want to do in that district, because all of that requires a 2/3 vote.
Right, boy, and that was not something that I could infer
so if
language.
only the first one passes, then we're just left with those uses.
Yes, and everything else would be existing non-conforming.
So there's only one use, mixed use. There's no business,
A multifamily.
multifamily, but there's no business in the downtown
I
then.
mean, whatever's there is there, but anything that
Till it-
isn't then allowed is non-conforming.
Yeah, that's the way I read it. So
You
that
have one and only use, it's allowed just in those districts, and nothing else.
that's
is
completely
allowed.
unacceptable.
And so then B, Appendix B, then amends that,
Yeah,
Right.
Then B,
amends that.
if he amends that, and then when you put it all together, you get
So
your
Billy
whole-
might be
Right.
All right.
But if you think that was clear, and I don't think I'm the dumbest person in this room. I'm not the smartest. But I didn't-
Okay, so who do you think is the dumbest, Marty?
I don't know. I'm sorry. I didn't want to say I'm the smartest person in the room, so I guess I offended everyone.
It's just funny.
We are on a journey together, and we are in the process. And let me say this, you guys know law school, right? And,
I did.
And if you guys told the same thing I got told about civil procedure, none of it was going to make sense to the end, and then it was all going to make sense. I promise you, I'm going to get you there. It's all going to make sense, and we're going to get everybody else there. The point was to do this, and then come to talk to you about it. So that's what we're doing. We're going to get you there.
Okay.
Okay.
Because I did not, you will all understand it, I promise.
Yes.
We'll get there. But so, from my perspective, you can allow multifamily housing as a right, but you can't allow anything else. So we're just
I
saying
got
three
it.
districts, multifamily.
I got it.
Then you go to B, we put everything back.
Right.
So
Oh,
when you get
boy.
down to 3.2, 3.2 is similar to 252, and that will make some changes to 3.2 and A, but then ultimately, we clean it up in B, and we get you to where I told you to be with 3.2, which is the accessory use. Then we go down to 4.1 in A. Literally, the only change being made in A to the dimensional table is the addition of footnote 7. And that is because it tells you that the dimensions for your 3 new districts are in the town center section. So that's all that's changing in A. In B, for the dimensional table, that's where you deleted a few footnotes and then you moved up a couple footnotes.
Right, and that threw me too. I'll tell you, I'm looking at these footnotes. So where did 7 come from?
We took what we got and we did our best to put it together, and then I'm going to explain it, and I think it's all going to make sense. So the next change, which is only reflected in B, is to section 5. You're adding a sentence to section 5.1 that specifies how nonconformities are going to be handled. It's on page 12 of 30 in Exhibit B. It's not in A at all, because all the nonconformity stuff is in B.
Right.
That's where that is.
Got it.
You don't see it in A at all, because there's nothing to change in it. So that's that. Now, Marty, I know you had a question about this one, so keeping in B, then we get to off-street parking and loading areas. Now, I put these in B, not A, because they apply to mixed use. Mixed use, because you're not using the state's definition of mixed use, you're using the different definition of mixed use, we've left that in the 2/3 vote. So because the changes to 613 and 616 are really to accommodate mixed use, you don't see them in A at all, left them in B. That gets us down to signs. Those changes, again, it's a 2-part, we've done what we can to address how signs are going to be handled in your 3 new districts, and then in A, and if you look at B, it gets to where you ultimately want to be, which is like getting rid of the business district and adding your other districts. So that is why signs are the way they are. Section 8.3, you will only see reflected in A, because that's your inclusionary zoning, and that's where we're making the changes that are necessary to accommodate how you can handle inclusionary zoning relative to 3A. So those changes will be made in A, nothing about them changing in B. Right, so the regulations, as I think you know, say that you can't require more than 10% affordability. And then just one other little tweak, because your zoning bylaw actually defines affordable housing to include low and moderate, and there's 2 different definitions. And for 3A purposes, it's really only the moderate that you're allowed to regulate for. So we've added language to accommodate that, because you can regulate for the 8%, not the 60% of AMI. So we've made that change in the majority article, because it relates to the regulation of multifamily housing. It's necessary for 3A compliance. Nothing about it needs to change in the 2/3 article, so you just don't need to see 8.3 reflected.
Got a question.
Sure.
Senior housing on 8.2, this is on Appendix B.
Yep, that's all in there.
Why does that use category say it's not allowed, for senior housing, not allowed in any of the districts in the downtown?
So what I.
So why is that still in then?
Where? So all.
Because it's
8.2.7?
8.2 in other locations.
Then you'll direct me to.
8.2.
8 points, page 13 of 30.
So let me take a look here.
8.2. Oh, no, it's the appendix.
So
So it's not-
8.2.7 right now says senior housing may include the following uses, and then it's.
So even though you can't have it in a downtown anywhere, the town center area, it's for the rest of the town is the reason that it's in here.
Yeah, so
Because it's-
the reason that
Okay.
there's any changes at all to 8.2 in here
Okay.
is because right now, you can have senior housing in the business district.
Right.
Yes.
By this appendix B, you are completely eliminating your business district.
Right.
So all of the changes that are in here to
Right.
8.2 are simply to account for the fact that you've eliminated your business district.
Okay.
So you're crossing out all references.
But is the senior housing not allowed because it has to be in conformity with 3A? Is that because it's family friendly? Oh, just, okay, it's just a business
The
district.
direction I
Okay.
got was simply that you were taking it, business
Okay.
district out, and you were not adding any downtown uses.
Okay.
So I didn't tell what.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened, but,
Maybe something for the future, you know,
Yeah,
we can
yeah.
always come back and clean things up, and I won't be surprised if we do that, but I took what I got, I split it up, and if I saw something problematic, I commented on it. I didn't repeat comments I'd given previously. I really focused on the new language, but that's just what I got.
okay.
So, any of the changes here to 8.2 are just eliminating the business district. It's
Yeah.
not substantively changing anything. So then that gets us to 9.1 in Exhibit A. So this is kind of something that's come up with 3A zoning, is that sometimes you have your overlays or in flood districts and things like that, and then we bump into special permit requirements or automatic dimensional requirements. So my understanding is that part of the new overlay district, not the downtown, but just the 3A overlay district is flood zone.
Yeah.
So we've just added language in 9.1, 4, and 9 to accommodate that the normal 80,000 per dwelling unit won't apply because that will interfere with 3A compliance, and that you can't be required to get a special permit. So that's only going to be reflected in Appendix A and not B, because it relates to 3A compliance and nothing else needs to change later about it. And then we get down to, in B, site plan review. So all of the changes to site plan review that have been proposed are in Exhibit B. Anything to 10.6 is in the 2/3 articles in Exhibit B. And the reason is because they are bylaw-wide changes that are applied universally. It's not the way they
Can you skipped over A213, general requirements?
I'm sorry, anything in
On B,
8.2.
on B.
Yeah, so anything in 8.2 is just eliminating business.
Eliminating that last sentence in 8213, an exception to this is for parcels located in the business district where wastewater treatment may be located, assuming Appendix B will be the final product that'll straighten out Article A, right?
There's nothing in A
So,
about senior housing.
okay.
In B, you're eliminating your business district.
That's right, okay, this is 8.2, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so anything,
okay, good.
anything 8.2.
Yeah, okay, I understand, yeah,
All business districts.
yeah, thank you.
No problem. It is, you know, if I'm going too fast, just stop me. So actually, I did skip something though. In B, you'll see 9.5, because you're eliminating the Willow Street overlay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's just crossing out the entire 9.5 that you have. So then we go to 10.6, which is site plan review, in Appendix B. Again, everything that's changing the site plan review is in your 2/3 article, because they're just bylaw-wide changes to site plan review, and there really isn't a way to split that all up. And some of them are more, like, technical, like capitalizing, so, more cleanup, but we put all of that in there.
So the reason for these changes, so the terms match the new definitions in the new zoning, mostly. And then number 8 is a new one, because Emil had a change. He wanted, if a non-conforming use became a conforming use, he wanted the planning board to get their eyes on that, which we can require that, but we need some sort of mechanism to do that. So some sort of application. So we have that requiring a site plan.
Yeah, I mean, one under 10.6.4, you know, already addresses changes from one use to another, so I guess if you add 8, it's gonna grab things that are changing, like, within. Well, this says from one permitted use category to another, so I don't know that 8 gets you anything more than 1 gets you. But I will say, you know, under 8, if you had a structure that was, say, this non-conforming commercial, and somebody wanted to make it conforming single-family residential, for example, you're now going to be requiring site plan review. For that single family. Which is a policy decision for you guys, I'm just. with site plan reviews in there. There are definitional changes in both A and B. So in Appendix A, the majority vote article, you're just tweaking the definition of multifamily dwelling, adding or multifamily housing, so that it is consistent with the state definition, which is in 40A, Section 1A, because we want to make sure that we are defining use as the state requires and then allows. And then the other thing is adding a definition of floor area ratio, which is specific only in the town center. So we left it in A because at this time, the town center is really only multifamily district.
And that's why you didn't put it in B?
Yes.
Because it will be in existence then?
Yeah, yep, and so it'll be there once B comes along, but,
Okay.
you know, when Mark clarified to me that it was only applicable to the new 3 districts and their multifamily, we put it in here. Anyway, and then in B, again, you just have your definition of mixed-use development and your definition of substantial improvement. So that's definitions, and then we get into the town center. I don't know if you want me to go section by section here, but basically the way this is set up, in Appendix A, you're creating a town center district that consists of 3 sub-districts, because it's your 3 multifamily districts. And so everything that's in here, in A, just relates to regulating those districts, which are multifamily districts, so that's why they're in A. B then makes minor changes, right? For example, in 9.81, it changes 3 to 5, because now you're adding the Depot Square and the Bayrock Civic districts, because you can add those by a 2/3 vote. So there's any little changes that relate to adding those districts, and then the regulations that apply to those districts are in Appendix B. The language regulating non-conforming uses and structures is also...
Could I just interrupt then? So, I hate to do this, but so in Appendix A,
Yes.
you have 9.8.1, the introduction and subsections A through E. They will remain and be incorporated into B if both are
So
passed.
basically, yes, so
Yes.
A gets adopted.
And then all of that material that's not reproduced in B,
Well, because it's all going to go into the zoning bylaw.
exactly. So I was like, where did it go?
It's kind of like you have this third document that's your zoning bylaw, right? And A is amending your zoning bylaw,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
going in there. And then B is going to further amend your
Right,
bylaw,
right.
all in there. So when you like merge these together, like surgery or something.
Yeah, so
I
it,
felt
Or
kind of
something.
like that's what I was doing,
yeah,
taking them
yeah.
apart.
So when I looked at
Yes.
9.8, I was like, well, what happened to all those sections? And what about 9.8.1?
So then when you read it with B, it puts it all back
It
together.
puts it all back together,
Again,
but
with the goal that it all gets adopted. So.
heads up on that would have gone a long way.
Word by word through all of this, but.
No, you don't have to.
Basically, what I do want to talk about in Appendix B, the 2/3 article, a little bit is the nonconformity language, so that's all in B. As I said before, Health Board will bring within B certainly anything regulating nonconforming uses, because multifamily is allowed as of right, it's not going to be a nonconforming use. And it was really difficult to kind of try to split structure out of that, so we left it all there. A lot of this language is new. I know Neil took a good first 10 seconds to have it drafting, and we talked, and he sent a couple, or at least one case on one of the issues, and updated it some more. I've added some comments. You know, this is something I think, you know, you guys probably need to review the non-conforming language. We can talk about it, we can see finality what you want it to be. I've added some comments, you have them all, like in the draft about it. So maybe we'll come back to nonconformities at the end, and I'll just finish going through, you know, how the rest of this goes. It really is just adding everything back in that wasn't in A. And then the last thing in A is the overlay district. So at the very end of A, that's on page 30, is just adding the new section 9.7, which is the regulations for the overlay district. And I'll comments on that. So A is like standalone, everything we need for multifamily housing is right to allow us to regulate it.
Got it.
And then when you combine it with B, you get to where you ultimately want it to be, so you don't go back now.
Well, if you go to page 22, A.
Which one?
A.
A?
that table of town center district building dimensional standards is actually lot standards. It's site standards. So
Wait,
the table was duplicated from the one right above
Right.
it.
Well, no, well, so on 20, there was something called, this is all I received, so if nothing needs to change, we can totally change it, but so if you go to page 20,
Yeah,
the table 1, which is town center district site dimensional standards.
correct.
And then my understanding is you also wanted table 2, town center
Which
district.
is building dimensional standards, and this is the same table that you produced up on table 1. So
you're saying
somehow it
there
got
should-
duplicated.
So I'm going to defer to Mark on that.
So you're saying something else needs to be there?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think the table that was probably in, maybe the intention was to get B to supplant this one. Because I think B is correct.
So the way that this came to me was with 2 tables. One for site dimensional standards.
Correct.
And one called building dimensional standards. If that's wrong, something needs to change in here.
the
Both of
caption,
them.
the caption is right, but the
Title's right,
contents,
the content is
The content is off.
the
All right, so
content is
I'm
wrong.
going to completely defer to Mark and to
Yeah.
Matthew on that part of it, because
Yeah.
that's that. But I see your point.
But it looks like if B gets accepted, then that's going to supplant this. So
It
that,
does, yeah, it will, but A should be right, and it's
Yeah.
in B twice as well anyway, so that, if that is an issue that needs to be addressed, then it's an issue that.
It's correct in B.
It's
Oh, I
correct in-
see what you're saying.
it's
Oh,
It's correct in B and incorrect in A.
Yeah.
So table 2 and A needs to get
Okay.
fixed. I see what you're saying, no,
Yeah.
thanks, Samuel. I got it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, yep.
Good.
Ultimately, though, the end result will be what's in B, as long as it gets adopted, because that has all 5 of us.
Right.
right,
I see what you're saying.
yep.
Okay. So that's everything on A. That's everything on the except non-conforming, which is added language, you guys did a little bit, so I don't think you had much time with it. But if you want to go in B to page 18,
Could I just talk about site plan review, though, in 9.8.7? You have in here, provided, however, that that site plan review for multifamily uses cannot be denied. And I think that's an overstatement, because there is a provision for denying site plan review if the application is
I
incomplete.
would say this, Martin, I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree with you on how the law site plan works, but I will tell you that all of the guidance that I've received from the AG's office and the OHLC, if they want to see a language in these that says site plan review cannot be denied. And if they think that you have reserved an ability to deny site plan review, you may have a problem with the OHLC compliance. So if Mark wants to follow up more with them, or you want to ask the OHLC questions about that, you may want to do that, but every bit of guidance that I've received, regardless of what I normally think about site plan and how it works, is that they're looking for that language. And
Right,
my
and-
recommendation is that you include it so that you don't have a problem with compliance.
Right. But you see, there's a problem, because if the application is incomplete, we couldn't approve it. Or if we impose conditions and the applicant refused to comply with the conditions.
Well, let me say this though, if you impose conditions that an applicant does not like, they can appeal the conditions. That's not necessarily a denial unless the court says those conditions function like a denial. That is an approval with conditions, which you always can do. So for 3A compliance purposes, our recommendation is the language be clear, and that is based on the feedback we've gotten from the state. We're going to keep you in compliance, so you can approve and you can approve the conditions. Because if you approve the conditions and they say, I'm not going to follow them, they need to appeal, and then a court can decide if that's a functional or not, if they're reasonable conditions.
I think we could follow up with the AOHLC. We met with them over Zoom this morning just to talk about scheduling, because the special town meeting is scheduled for the 14th, which is the deadline. So our question was, do we have to submit the paperwork on the 14th? And the short answer is yes. So, hopefully the meeting won't go past midnight, because we'll have to have that kind of teed up and
Technically, to Mark, I think you're supposed to have your, it's not necessarily that you just vote on the 14th, you're supposed to have your district compliance application in on the 14th.
Right. Well, they knew that. The select board knew that
Just to clarify.
when they chose it.
Yeah. I mean, I would say this, if you want to put anything in here as a site plan review for multifamily housing that is short of may not be denied, I would recommend you run that language by EOHLC in advance, as your attorney, I'm recommending that language. And that's based on all the feedback that I've gotten from them on this particular item.
But they did promise if we had questions, they would be responsive.
Yeah, I have a question similar. So what happens if the EOHLC determines that one of our zones is unacceptable? Does it go back to town meeting, or does it just go back to the, like, how does that get handled?
So I can't tell you what they'll tell you, right? I can't say that.
Well, I'm just looking, like, what have they done in any other town? Have other towns experienced this?
They're still working through a lot of them. I know they've approved a lot. I'm not personally familiar with any of what they've said, like, you can't do this or that. So, and a lot of communities have pre-reviews. So let me say this. If they tell you that there's a problem and you need to fix something, the only way to fix it would be to go to town meeting with another amendment. That's the only way you can ever amend zoning is through town meeting. So if they say to you,
This zone is not going to work.
if they catch something or they say something, my hope would be that they would say, look, we understand you tried to do this, we have an issue with this, we'd like you to try to fix it,
So it would have to go back to
I
town.
mean, I don't know what other actions they would take, but all I can tell you is if you have to amend your zoning, the only way to amend your zoning is to fix it.
I asked that this morning, and they said, you got a grace period, so they'll tell you you have
Right.
to fix something, and you have, I think, 6 months.
Right, because I just feel like some of the things where people have tried, like paper compliance or whatever, I didn't know if those things have gone through and been accepted or not.
I mean, you comply or you don't, right?
Well, yeah, just trying to figure out like I don't know where the lines are, and I haven't been looking to see how they've come out. And then the other thing we had talked about is the AG potentially striking out the sunset clause if we add it.
Yeah, so I expect some sunset clauses will be struck. So they struck one from Bill Rickle.
Okay.
Generally, my understanding of how zoning just works is that the way that you amend zoning bylaws is through town meeting. It's not self-amending or not anything like that. In rare occasions, zoning will tolerate moratoriums, but that's different because that's usually something that says we have zoning in place. We're suspending the application of the zoning for a very set specific period of time because we have these studies that support that we need to, like, say over building moratorium because you have studies that say you have to evaluate some particular infrastructure or something like that. And there's case law that says zoning will tolerate moratorium in very strict circumstances and we need and proof and what have you. But again, the only way to amend zoning is through 48.
Okay, so if they do strike the sunset clause, if we put it in, and you said they already did it with Bill Ricker, so
They struck one in Bill Rickle. I haven't seen any proposed language from you folks. I'm speaking hypothetically here. I'm not speaking.
right, that's fine.
Yeah.
And then would that then go back to town meeting if they strike it, or when they strike something, they can just accept it?
If the Attorney General disapproves of part of the zoning bylaw amendment, it is struck.
But that means it's accepted with taking that part out?
Yep, so you
That
don't-
bylaw is accepted?
Yep, so you have language in here that says essentially a part of this is struck, the rest of it survives. So anything in
Okay,
that
gotcha.
is struck, the rest of it survives. So you don't go back to town meeting to fix anything.
Right, that's, right.
When you put the whole bylaw together, it doesn't go in.
Just because I thought some people may want to think that a sunset clause might be a protection, so then I thought if that could change their vote depending on if it's there.
So a concern I would have about a sunset clause is not just AG, it's also EOHLC, because if for some reason AG doesn't strike it and EOHLC has an issue with it, then it's going to impact our compliance.
Okay.
So, and I can't speak for EOHLC, I mean, again, we're talking hypothetical language here, but,
I think Wenham had a sunset clause in their bylaw that just passed.
and again, we'll see what
Right.
AG does with these things, but they definitely struck one.
Yeah, I was just curious on that whole process.
Yeah, no, again, I mean, I expect it would be struck, but if it's not, I would have concerns.
About the EOHLC, got it.
It did go through the pre-review process, though. Nothing was flagged by EOHLC. They can't guarantee that in the final review they won't have something, but at
But
least
there was no sunset clause in here.
there was this severability clause.
Yeah, the sunset clause would be something that basically, it's almost like Mission Impossible, it says it's like self-destructs if. Right, I mean, the sunset clause basically would say.
We're a surgeon, we're Mission Impossible.
Or we didn't have to do this anymore, the bylaw provision. I think that is unlikely to be deemed consistent with 40A because again.
Got it.
We amend zoning through affirmative vote to town meeting and the 40A process.
I have one more question on 3A. It's, somebody had emailed us, and I've done a little research since, during today, and on condos, my understanding is a condominium develop 3A. So one of our overlay districts is a condo development.
It's 55 plus. That's, you're talking about Canterbrook.
Correct.
It's a senior housing by special permit, so.
So this won't impact anything that's existing
No.
unless somebody decided they want to come in and change it.
Okay, so what my understanding is if somebody wanted to sell their single-family home in a condo development, they could, and it would come under, the 3A would supersede any condo agreements.
No.
No?
No.
So 3A zoning is simply zoning that would allow somebody to develop their property a certain way.
Okay,
If that property is subject to private condominium documents and regulated elsewhere, then those documents control how it's
Right.
used. 3A has nothing to do with that. 3A is simply an opportunity
Right.
to.
so I have somebody who basically, like, gave all sorts of citings from the law, who's an attorney, who basically said that 3A would supersede the condo document.
I've heard that in a number of communities.
Okay.
3A is literally the creation of zoning districts that allow for certain types of uses. It has nothing to do with condominium documents. It can't impact any kind of existing uses. You know, if you really want to send that to me, I'll give you a written response as to why that's not.
Well, maybe I'll
Even if a
send,
developer purchased it?
Well, look, if a developer bought out the entire
No,
project.
just the units that were,
No,
No.
they're subject to the condo.
No.
So I mean, if a developer buys out an entire project.
Right.
right, well, they would have to buy the
Buy out a
whole
project,
project.
tear it
Buy the
down
whole
and build
project.
something else.
Right,
and
but
then-
not
then you come
individual.
under 3A.
You're saying not an individual.
But 3A can't change your private contract.
And Canterbrook, too, is 55 plus, so that it's age restricted. And so it was developed as an age restricted
Correct.
55 plus condominium.
I'm
Someone
just-
could not sell their condo and have multifamily in there.
Well, I'm glad I asked, because that's why I want to make sure we're clear.
We got these questions from Deb Stafford. That was one of them.
Right, yeah. She had a number of
Literally
questions.
just providing an opportunity to do certain kinds of housing within the confines of zoning. That's all. That's all this is.
Okay, so if there's already a private contract with a condo agreement, is what you're saying. That would be what,
Going to have
great.
impact on existing condominiums.
Got it. Got it.
Can I make a substantive comment
Absolutely.
about like changing one of these standards?
Which standard?
Is this an appropriate time? It doesn't have anything to do with the law. It has to do with if we send something to Robin that has something that I don't like and I don't correct it, then when it gets to the town, it's going to be the same way. So I'd like to change it now.
Well, sure, what is
Okay,
it?
so this is on page 32, dimensional standards for the MFOD.
In exhibit A.
And it's
Is MFOD's in exhibit A?
97.4. That table.
And this might be more of a Matthew question, because anything to do with.
Right. I'm just, so the overarching thing here is the maximum building footprint of 8,000 square feet. And at 3 stories on 1,000 square feet per unit, that's roughly a 25-unit kind of small apartment, maybe not so small apartment building. And doesn't look anything like anything that's there. Doesn't look like anything that's downtown. And my first thought is, all right, I can drop that back to 4,000 square feet for the maximum building footprint. Given all the other qualities, what that means is instead of putting one 24,000 square foot building on an acre, you put 2 4,000 square foot buildings on an acre. So now you're getting the same density, you're just getting it through a larger number of smaller buildings that look a little bit more like what's in the town and less like institutional apartment buildings. Doesn't change any of the, the development still meets, all the density requirements are there. So, I mean, you could even, I'm trying to think of what an 8,000 square foot apartment building looks like. A 24-unit apartment building looks like. There's one of the old Gordon Conwell apartment buildings has got 24 units in it. That's kind of the size of that. Whereas a 4,000 square foot footprint, which would be 12,000 square feet of living area, that's, that's four duplexes attached to each other, or a row of townhouses that are attached to each other, each with 3 units in them. It's just something lower scale, lower mass. Doesn't have any effect on the ability of these parameters to meet 3A. It's just a question of, how one, small. This is basically one bigger building as opposed to 2 smaller buildings. You could even go with 3, even smaller buildings. You eventually, if you got it down to the building was too small, then, the state might say, well, that's not feasible for apartments, or it's not apartments, it's not feasible for rental. I'm not even sure about that. There's a very active rental market for single-family housing. So I don't know quite what the right number would be, but I'd like to see it a lot less than 8,000 square feet footprints. Matthew, you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, so first to clarify that the maximum building footprint is for any single building, but multiple buildings are allowed. I don't see any problem going down to 4,000 square feet for individual buildings. You'd have obviously twice as many buildings, but I don't see anything in the regs. It won't affect the model. 8,000 is not only reasonable, it's incredibly common. You've probably seen them so many times that you don't even notice them because it's a kind of developer sweet spot, but we can go, I don't see any reason why we couldn't go to 4,000.
I want to make sure that other board members understand the logic behind larger numbers, somewhat smaller buildings, looking more to scale to what's in the town.
I think it's a good argument to make. I think it's a good argument because the 8,000 did seem initially. I know there's a 20% coverage, so with more buildings, you're going to run up at some point against the 20% coverage, building coverage.
Well, the coverage goes across all of the land. So
Yeah,
it's, that's the deciding factor.
Yeah.
It's 20. But I'm still keeping the 20.
I like the idea of a smaller building.
Right. So it's 2 4,000 square foot buildings as opposed to 1 8,000.
Yeah, so we'll
footprint.
change it to 4,000, and do we have to change the footnote? Because the footnote says, as defined in section 9.8.2, applies to any single building, multiple buildings on one lot are permitted. So the footnote should just say multiple buildings on one lot are permitted.
That's what it says.
No.
It says as
No.
defined.
We want to allow multiple buildings.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So the footnote should read multiple buildings on
So
one lot
taking out
are
a single
permitted.
building.
Take out all the
I think
preceding
you want
sentence.
to applies to any single building, because even if you make it 4,000, you're
Yeah.
saying that 4,000
Oh,
applies
true.
to any single
Yeah.
building.
I think the footnote
okay.
stands.
Yeah.
The
I think
footnote's correct, just as it is.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just to be 100% sure, this won't affect the compliance model at all, right, Matt?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so.
So do we need to vote on that, or can we just agree?
We have an attorney here who can answer that question. Robin, do we need to vote on this change?
Well, ultimately, you're going to vote to
Make a report,
make a report
put
and
recommendation.
recommendation on a version. So you certainly could take a vote specifically to make that change, or if there's.
You can just make the change and then we vote for the thing. It
Well,
comes with it.
I think that Bill, this was a wonderful idea, and I think we should honor it with a vote.
Marnie, we agree.
There's also
Okay, so-
no minimum open space requirement.
You still keep, the open space and the,
Oh, it's in
the building coverage
the minimum
ratio is the same thing.
Lot
One's the
size
inverse of the other.
Covered.
Lot size, but it doesn't, you could cover the lot with
Parking.
impervious surface.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
and not leave anything open.
Yes.
So if we're looking to
Fix it.
enhance the section,
Yes.
What is the,
put a requirement in for that 40% of open space.
Again, I would just make sure it's not.
As a minimum.
Open space is space that is not covered by a building or areas dedicated for vehicular use. So it's essentially anything but those things.
Yep.
And so by changing the maximum building size, you don't really change that requirement.
no. You're not changing any requirement. If you wanted to impose an additional requirement, you have to be an additional requirement
Yeah.
that the non-built upon area be, so much of the non-built upon area be not
Like,
impervious surfaces. I mean, something like that, but I don't,
well, earlier in the document, it is stating 40% open space, a minimum requirement for 40% lot open space
So in the
has been.
overlay, there is no requirement. This is just the overlay.
In the overlay, there's no requirement, but zone, so it'd be good to put in the overlay, I think.
Matthew, would you have to look at because you've calculated the number of dwelling units on this Asbury site, is that correct?
Yeah.
But it's got the 80,000 square feet minimum lot size. So you
Yeah.
can figure out the math.
the math still works, it's all the same. If all you change
You have
is,
to come down with 15
if all you
per-
change is the building footprint from 8 to 4, there's no requirement on the number of buildings, you get the same net density.
But by
Yes.
adding more building, you might be adding more impervious surface for, traffic.
Parking per car, it's still the same number of apartments.
Right.
He has a question on the open space.
Just
So.
would want to just. Does it hurt to have the open space requirement?
On the overlay?
We could add a more explicit
Well,
open space
open-
requirement if it's not on this particular table. This table was sort of modeled after your other districts, the R1A. And I think it was, we were keeping it simple that way, but if we want to add an explicit open space requirement, we can do that. It will have to be put into the model, but I don't think it's going to, if we calibrate it correctly, it won't affect compliance.
Would that be something like an impervious coverage?
Yeah.
Okay.
So do we want to vote on both of those?
Right.
Again, I like the
And we
idea.
will have to defer to Matthew to
Yep.
get the open space
course.
percentage that works with the model.
But vote for him to go ahead and investigate it and put in the right percentage so that it
And we will defer to his
doesn't.
expertise on that.
So it still allows parking, but keeps
Yep.
the,
Yep.
And then we'll change the maximum building footprint to 4,000 square feet.
Per
So-
building, yep.
So there have to be another definition then, Robin, impervious.
Well, I think if you're just going to add an open space requirement, and you already have open
Open
space
spaces
requirements.
I thought he said open
That's
space could
throughout
be
the-
vehicular.
Anything
No, I'm
but.
saying open space is not building.
It's not,
It's not parking.
Not building or parking.
okay.
Okay.
Right, I think that's what Matt said.
Yes,
Okay,
correct.
I got that in.
So if
But
you're
it's
just gonna-
also not technically impervious.
Yeah, yeah, see,
You put,
so maybe open space would be the better, that's being
Put a
used
hockey
already.
rink.
I think you have open space already defined in your base definition, so I think we'll just build off of that and make sure it aligns with
Yeah, that's-
the model. The terminology that's used in the model is very confusing, and we'll just make sure that aligns with what the model thinks it is.
Yeah,
Okay, so I'll entertain a motion on that, on those two items. The addition of open space subject to what Matthew finds in the model, and the change to 4,000
4,000
No,
square foot
just square foot
footprint as
footprint.
opposed to 8.
So moved.
Okay. Do I have a second?
second.
Okay, Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Billy Nye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Herr,
Aye.
and Marnie Crouch. Aye. Okay,
So now back to nonconformities.
Yeah, so I think the only thing left at this point is non-conformity.
It's nonconformities.
That is in Appendix B, start looking at page 19. Page 8. So again, the language was originally drafted by Neil, and then Neil and Martin have talked about it, made some additional changes.
I was in the wrong
Based on
document.
some of the comments that I had, and then what you subtract in here are additional recommended changes from me, as well as just some comments explaining the changes. So however you want to go, I'm happy to talk to you about questions or whatever.
Well, your changes are really to implement 40A,
So,
Section 6.
So, yeah, let me just give a kind of general explanation of that. So, in general law, chapter 48, section 6, in the first paragraph, it contemplates and authorizes that zoning bylaws can regulate non-conforming uses and structures. And you can designate your permit granting authority or special permit granting authority, so planning board, zoning board, to be the board that decides those, so it can be either, you specify that in your zoning bylaw. And you can specify in your zoning bylaw that it changes, extensions, modifications, and you name the non-conforming structures and non-conforming that whatever is being proposed is not more detrimental than the existing non-conformity. That's the standard that we always evaluate changes in non-conformity. And that's what I'm defining. So that would be a regular majority vote, not a super majority that, 48-9 assigns special permits. Because that section says it can be a permit granting authority or a special permit granting authority, case law has evolved and said you can make that finding a special permit for process purposes, but it doesn't become a special permit for substantive purposes. So you can make it a special permit and then it requires a forfeit vote, as a normal special permit would, but the standard you're applying is still that finding standard. You're not applying normal special permit criteria. So the changes that I recommended in here were so that you are issuing, so that the planning board has the ability to regulate changes to non-conforming uses and structures by making the finding I just discussed. It's two-thirds vote, or it's a supermajority vote, 4/5. But it's by that standard, not by any additional special permit criteria, because it's not a use special permit. It's not a special permit like 48-9 would allow you to say a car wash is a special permit, but a single family isn't. And so that's the basis of the change that I've recommended at 3 different places in here when we're dealing with findings, is that we're going to line the statute.
Is there any case law defining or elucidating what substantially more detrimental means? Because that seems pretty loose to me.
Only to say that it's very fact specific, right? So if you had 2 different uses in front of you or 2 different structures in front of you and you said, we think this isn't, and then a letter appealed, we would look to find anything that was like factually, substantively similar. I can say it's probably more cases where a court goes, we don't really think that's a big deal. And then, for example, if somebody's adding a dormer, it's probably not going to be considered a substantially more detrimental than what they have. If somebody wants to put on like a massive addition and now it's really close to a property line or imposing on something, it's super fact specific. It really comes down to, do you think it's going to have a substantial impact?
It
So
just
the
seems to
burden
me to
would be
be
on the-
so idiosyncratic. And just
Well, it seems like the burden would be on the board to make substantive findings that would be supportable.
yeah.
Yes, so
Or-
the burden's on the applicant to demonstrate to you that whatever they are proposing to do is not going to be substantially more detrimental.
Right, but if we were to say it was substantially more detrimental, the burden would be on us to say, here's how, here's why.
Right.
You certainly would want to give your reasons.
Right.
Absolutely. You'd want to say, look, right now you have this, you're proposing to have that. These are the things that are changing. These are the impacts that we expect to see from those things, and this is why we think it is or is not a problem.
Yeah. So it's
I
not
suspect
toothless, it's
that
just,
the abutters would have a lot of input into what is substantially more detrimental.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it depends on what is being proposed. A small addition, a bay window, a dormer, versus a tear down of a tiny little cottage and building a 4,000 square foot house, right?
Right.
It depends really on what's being proposed, what's in front of you. There are discretionary calls involved in that, but you can't turn a finding into a discretionary use permit. like 48 hours. So that's why I changed that the way I changed it, was to be consistent. Everything else was pretty minor, I think.
Yeah.
Well, then there was a change in the signage area, I think.
Yeah, so signs are really tricky in zoning, but there is some case law. There's one case called Baron Chevrolet, where they say that, like, the sign itself is the sign. And so it's not necessarily a change in use of the sign, just a change, like, the message, essentially. So I tweaked it a bit, because I don't necessarily think, like, if you have a sign and it's a sign, I thought this went a little beyond what you could do with regular signs. And I get the goal, obviously, when we're trying to bring anything in conformance with zoning, but, I just recommended changes that I thought would bring it within the case law, within the statute.
And then the change from 1 year to 2 years.
So that again is rooted in the statute, and that's something I discussed with Emil. So, again, in 48(6), it says that zoning bylaws can regulate uses and structures which have been abandoned or discontinued for 2 years. And in the law, abandonment and discontinued are actually two different things. So abandonment can happen anytime. It involves intent. It can happen in less than 2 years. For example, the example I always give is, if you had something that required a license to operate, say like a Class 2 used car dealership, and someone comes into town hall and they say, I'm retiring, see you all, here's my license, I'm done, I turn it in, never going to do this again, you may have an argument that that use was immediately abandoned. You don't have to wait 2 years, right? Because they're showing you this intent. Somebody just closes up shop and walks away, maybe they're coming back, or they're not coming back, but there's no question after 2 years, it's discontinued. And so I was just trying to keep it consistent with the 2-year language in the statute. I don't think a bylaw can basically define abandonment to be less than a 2-year period. I think it's 2 years. So I was just trying to be consistent with 40A. And this stuff gets tricky, but we tried to keep it in line with the statute and the case law that interprets some of this.
Well, in my opinion, and I'm certainly open to other viewpoints, the statute really speaks quite clearly, and we're probably well advised to just track that language.
I think it's your greatest chance of having the least fights about it and disputes.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
So, there are not a lot of changes without putting this on paper, and I just, and I said this when I talked to him, like, nonconformities are one of the hardest things that we deal with on a regular basis. So, there's a lot of cases that they kind of talk, the courts will talk about that. They'll kind of comment, we're here again with this language, and it's tricky stuff.
So are you, what is your position with respect to subsection 5, Roman numeral 5?
The change of principal use on
Yeah,
signs?
are you advocating elimination of
Yeah,
that?
I think you should take that out. I think that if there's a sign associated with a business, just because there's a difference between the messaging and the sign itself. Like, just because the business changes and now you're going to put different words on the sign, doesn't mean that the use or the purpose of the sign is going away. It's still a sign.
Right.
So I don't think that you can successfully say that if the use of the business changes, that's a change. It's still a sign. Just because the words are different, I don't think it means that you can say it has to go away. So I would just take 5 out. Yeah.
Okay. Any additional comments with respect to this?
The only thing about signs is they'll never go away.
Yeah.
Nobody would ever give up a sign,
Where it
even if they're not.
happens is with discontinuance or abandonment,
Yeah.
It's hard, but I mean, if there's been a business there and a new business comes in, and they're allowed to operate, it's hard to tell them, except to take your sign out. I mean, if it goes from like, Marnie's roast beef to Emil's roast beef, it's
Right.
still just a restaurant. I get it.
It's the nonconformance is the issue, then. It's not getting rid of the sign, it's just
Yeah, I mean, signs are
relocating.
tricky, right? We get into
Yeah.
First Amendment issues, we get into
Yeah.
conformity issues, but,
The language in it, but the location,
yeah. But again, the location's not changing, right? If it's in a setback, it's in a setback, nothing about it changes just because it goes from making, say, like a restaurant to a.
no, but the idea, I'm not going to belabor this, but the idea of moving things into more conformance over
Well, I-
time, signs will stay there forever.
Yep, no, I mean, I get it, and that's just
Yeah.
my opinion on what the most you can do with it is.
That's not something you're going to address in the form-based code?
For new signs.
New signs, yeah.
Sorry.
We're talking about,
This is
yeah.
just existing.
Yeah.
This is pre-existing. Okay.
Are we deferring to Robin on this one?
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
I will. I just put together some language because I was asked to. And
Yeah,
so,
no.
you
It
know,
was helpful.
Like I said, there's minimal stuff in here.
Yeah.
You know, and like I said, it's super confusing, and
yeah,
you know, I read all sorts of cases on it all the time, and
Yeah.
you know, deal with it at a different level. That's what I'm here for, is to take what you do and
Yeah.
comment. So, I mean, if you guys want, you could vote to just adopt, to adopt these recommended changes, so we know we're set.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's do that. So we'll have entertain a motion to adopt the changes to the nonconformity section recommended by Robin.
yeah. I'll make that motion.
Second?
Okay, Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Herr,
Aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. Okay,
So that's my presentation. That gets us to 10 after 9.
it does. And so we have to discuss at some point who is going to write this narrative, because if we have a joint meeting with the select board in a week, I can pretty much guarantee if I was confused after 4 or 5 hours of study, they will be equally confused. So I think with what you said,
I'll work with Mark on that. But before you get to that point, I did want to remind you it's a public hearing in case there was anybody on Zoom that.
oh, right, is anyone on Zoom?
Did we want to address Deb Safford's questions, or? The questions, not comments, really.
We can, and we can do that unless
I don't
there's
think
someone who
anybody's on.
wants to raise their hand on Zoom.
Is there anybody else besides those 5?
No ears.
Clearly.
I don't know who
I didn't know if there were
iPad 2
more
is.
people than the 5.
Okay, so Deb Stafford did have some questions. One was about the
Condo thing,
the
yeah.
Canterbrook condos, and we answered that question. Then she had a question whether Harbor Light could flip the site where it plans to build the 45 units of very low.
40B. It's a 40B unit
Yes,
property, and I think I did a little research on that today, too, after that. And because Shrewsbury had a project that was going to be include 75 40B, and they pulled it as soon as the 3A zone got passed.
well, Harbor Light has their comprehensive permit, so
So but this is different. I think in the other case, it was going to be 25% affordable. That was kind of how they had gotten passed by the planning board. But when the 3A zoning went through, they changed it. And so now they only did 15 units because they only did the 10%,
Well,
whatever.
I have no idea what Harbor Light can do and what
Right.
they would want to do.
Right.
But, and I'm not sure what the acreage is. Does anyone remember what that is?
Matthew, isn't there a
9.5.
file on that, a file on that 40B? With
Yeah.
plans, we reviewed it, we changed it enormously.
It's 4 acres approximately.
Yeah.
So there are
And how many
45
units?
units now.
45 units in one building.
There could be 60.
Okay.
60.
So I think that it's a question that's not answerable because it depends on what Harbor Light has committed to. It may have, we don't know, it could have
Right.
contracts that it doesn't want to break. It's a plus or minus kind of situation. I mean, you could have as many as 60 market rate rentals versus 45 very low income.
Harbor Light doesn't want to
40B.
build market rate units. That's
No.
not their goal.
But they could
No, what
flip
we're
it.
saying is if they
They could
pull,
flip it.
if somebody,
Because if they've bought the property, my recollection is they bought the property for $1 million from
the
Peter
Britons,
Britton's.
yeah.
And so it's conceivable they could flip it for more than what they paid for it. But we can't answer that question. It's totally
Well, would
speculative.
it be better to put it, could we do the overlay district over a different place like Patton Ridge Drive that has
I,
already
that's now,
development, or no? Where the ship
Sorry.
sailed? Okay, I just,
Say on that is, you know, you get to a little concerned about scope, right? If you start really changing this, we want to make sure the changes that you're making are within the scope of like your public hearing.
right,
So if
yeah,
you
they
change
can't do it now.
Do you have any input on what that question was? Have you heard anything about that?
No, I haven't heard anything about it. I can't answer what Harbor Light will do. The zoning will allow,
yeah.
the zoning will allow.
The other thing, probably Harbor Light got waivers of different regulations that would apply to other types of non-40B development. In fact,
Right.
it could only be a 40B there because I don't know if it's R1A. I don't know what the underlying zoning is there, whether it's RA or R1B.
If we pass this, they could profitably build 60 market rate housing units, and that's worth about $20 million, and so they could probably double the profit what they paid for the land. They could sell to a private
yeah,
developer.
I don't think that's a question for you. We're just
No,
discussing.
I mean, it's totally speculative. We
Yeah.
can't answer that question.
But the point I want to bring up, though, that unless I misunderstand this completely, 40B was going to help address our housing, our low-income housing, right? So if they flip, that hurt. I mean, 3A is already going to change that number as it is.
Oh, yeah, it will
And if they
hurt
flip,
it.
it's going to hurt it even more.
Correct.
Absolutely. But we can't answer it because we don't have enough facts. But any development that would be non-40B wouldn't have the benefit of those waivers that go along.
I know, but now it's by right, so what are
Right, but
there?
it's by right, but it doesn't include those waivers.
We need to build the units. 3A, first of all, sets a maximum on the number of 40B units. It's quite small. And what counts to our quota is having built units, not having land available that could be built at that density.
You're talking about
Those aren't
for
built yet.
affordable?
For 40B.
Right.
We're still under the gun to actually produce units.
Right. And that's
We're
what
not
that's what
making
they're
any
targeting
progress.
that area
Yeah.
for.
I mean, with the 10% inclusion,
They could be
we basically
10%.
keep, well, that's what we have, and that's, it basically keeps us from getting further behind.
Right.
Yeah, that would be another 30 units if they built 10%.
But we
or something.
simply can't answer the
Okay,
question.
what
so-
other questions were there?
And then she has an impact study on the Wenham 3A zone behind Crosby's that was just approved. Has there been an impact study? Not to my knowledge. And
Is that true that to access their 3A zone, they have to go through Hamilton, that parking lot?
I'm not sure that they could go through an MBTA parking lot
Oh,
without
interesting.
Authority from the MBTA, except maybe for emergency vehicles. I think they have to go through that other street behind Crosby's. Nonetheless, I mean, that would have a significant impact on that intersection, which is already problematic. But again, we don't know.
I don't think that's really in our purview.
No, it's not. So, these are just.
I think it was, if it was accessed through Hamilton, if there was,
I think
if
it's-
the only way they could access that property was through Hamilton, I think that might have been what she was getting at.
Right.
But I don't remember what she
It's
actually
really
said.
Wenham's issue, and it's not our issue.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
perfect.
it might be our issue in terms of police and fire,
Right.
emergency
Access.
access and whatnot.
Right, but they would need to satisfy it, and
They'd
if
have
they,
to
and if
figure
they
it out.
wanted to go through that property, they'd have to get permission from the property owner, and then the
Right.
property owner would have to come before the planning board to modify the,
Yeah.
Okay.
so,
Yeah.
so.
Oh, that's good.
It's all hypothetical right now.
Right. So I think that, Deb isn't here to ask the questions, and given the time, with no disrespect to her, I think we should consider where we are. I think we have to close our public hearing. It's important that the planning board close the public hearing because now my recollection is fading on the amount of time. So if the planning board were not to make a report and recommendation, there has to be the passage of, is it 30 days or 21 days before the special town meeting to vote on this. So this is giving us some cover, not that we, don't want to do a report and recommendation, but I think it's the best thing to do is to close the public hearing, particularly since we don't have much of a public at this juncture.
Yeah,
So-
you can certainly close it
Yeah.
tonight, which is great, and then you can finish your deliberation
Absolutely.
at the next meeting, and that way you guys can have another chance to proofread and make any little tweaks.
Right, right. So right now, I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing on our zoning bylaw amendments.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Herr,
Aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. So, do we have any other matters to address at this point?
You keep talking about a meeting that it's not on my calendar.
So, yeah.
I
so
know,
this-
and I learned about that meeting last night, listening to the select board, where they announced that there was going to be a joint meeting.
I apologize, I thought that came from you folks. I asked
No,
you
that
this.
can,
So
that,
I looked on the calendar last night after they said it and was like, I have no recollection of this, but that doesn't mean we haven't talked about it. But clearly we hadn't.
I think I may have, I was on a Zoom call with Joe, and he has a new timeline for the July 14th special meeting, and I basically said the only way we could even remotely do this report and recommendation in time would be to have a meeting on June 24th, which then morphed into a joint meeting with the select board.
Correct. I was
think
there
that's
last
just
night.
Because the 30th is the drop dead deadline. That's the holiday week. I think they just want to get it over with next week because they're running out of time to.
You have to publish the warrant.
Correct.
Yeah, so, right. So planning board and select board on June 24th, then the finance and advisory committee, I guess they have to do their work by the 25th, and then the warrant has to be posted on the 30th. So our next meeting was July 1st, so it may be that, we may have a business on July 1st, I don't know.
I think the goal would be that you finish your deliberation, take your vote on the 24th, because that way any of those future changes you have go into the version that gets printed in the warrant. So we're not
Right.
saying a town meeting have to
Oh, yeah, that's a nightmare.
It's final,
Got it.
because I think that'll be easier for everybody.
Well, I think at this point, in my mind, the most important thing that we do is to have a narrative so that the select board understands what you just said and that we have something to work with to put in the warrant so that the public understands how this operates. Because, trust me, they'll stumble over it because it's, I wish I had known what you said when I reviewed it, and it would save me so much time
5,000
and effort.
voters you can call. No.
I think more important than the town is the select, because we all didn't understand it, and I guarantee the select board is Bill. It's Bill Wheaton's first comment, and it's we all have to have the common understanding that majority vote, if passed, all we have left is a multifamily town center, and that's it.
Yes.
So if the majority passes and B doesn't get included,
Yeah.
because the nuance won't be understood, the only thing, if we're happy with taking the risk of walking away from a town meeting where the only thing we have in our town center
Right.
is multifamily, by right,
Yeah.
allowable use, then we're good. If
No, it's
Not
not the
comfortable with
only
that.
thing.
it's the only
You
thing,
can still have commercial, it's an overlay. You can
not.
still do,
Not an overlay.
it's new zoning.
There's zoning.
So the only thing that's going to be left if the first article passes and the second doesn't,
for-
if Appendix A passes and Appendix B doesn't, that's what Pat's describing that scenario. Am I right, Pat?
That's right.
That is correct.
Well, you have business until you don't have business. In other words, they're all grandfathered in.
Yeah.
yeah,
But you're talking about what says in your zoning is allowable use from this point
Right,
forward.
so.
So it would all be
I think
non-conforming,
that
right?
My point is, we need the narrative
Yeah.
so that we clearly understand exactly what Robin said and exactly what you're saying.
And that would be next week would be a great practice,
Yeah, no,
since we
you'll
have the
it-
select board.
You'll have it before then, because for next week, I want a complete warrant.
Right, right.
Right,
Right.
right.
And
I'll work on that.
then we can get their feedback and see if there's things that we can clarify
Yeah,
more.
and so if you run that by me, because I can play Mickey the Dunce, because I was Mickey the Dunce.
Because she wasn't the
reading this.
smartest, she's not the smartest one.
And so when I
Not
read the
dumbest.
language, the only use, I was like, what?
No, but you're right, though, you did
is
catch
right.
it. If it's only A, it is the only use.
Yeah, yeah, so all of that was just not clear.
Yeah, no, we'll make it. That's the whole
I
point,
think she's good.
was to give you these, and then we'll talk about it, and everyone will understand it.
And we have to, even if we understand it and the select board understands it, we have to make sure the town understands it. Now, I think that Article 2 is probably more likely to pass, in a sense, because it's not as controversial. It's
Correct.
really planning our town center, and it could be great.
But the question, could we,
Based on number one, isn't it?
but we were
It
just
is,
saying
and it's
that,
3A that is the controversial element. It's
So
not
what
the
happens if
form-based code.
no, that's what we
Doesn't
said
happen.
earlier. If the first one doesn't pass, we don't want to pass the second one.
Right.
We want to refer it back to the planning board, because we have to make other changes.
Right, so it's
If we don't do it in that order, the only thing we
has
can
to be
do
in that
is
order.
pass the first one and then pass or fail the second.
In the description,
Or
it could be politically useful to explain that.
Oh, yes.
Because if people say, I like form-based code, but I hate 3A.
Yes.
Well, I will lay out, like, the approach when we did it and the basis for this.
And could you
then
send it to us?
Yeah, now, I'll send it to you. I don't, you guys for meeting our reasons can't go back and forth offline.
Right.
But I'll send it to Marnie, one of you even can look at it with Marnie. And then you can add things like that.
Right.
Like, the policy stuff, I have a hard time putting, like, the words in the town's mouth, but I'll lay out the framework of what we did.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then you guys can add, because usually in the warrants, you guys do the explanations, not us anyway. That's
Right.
the
Right.
policy
You
statement.
know, and I think it could be worded neutrally enough so that it's not a political statement, it's just a factual consequence.
Absolutely.
Right, we're going to do all of this downtown. And, oh, by the way, that's going to meet half of our 3A requirement, basically. But we still have the other half of the 3A requirement that we have to meet.
So
So what we've done is we've gone over here to Asbury Street and created an MFOD.
what?
Is that the way it's going to go?
Allow you to have non-contiguous districts that
Right.
Right.
come together as 3A.
So would it be, I'm going to ask the unpopular question here, would it be appropriate, since we're having a narrative up front to explain all this, the narrative should include, if you do not pass the 3A aspect, here are the tangible things that will happen to your community, not the ethereal threats.
So that's not a question for me. That's a question for John.
Well, we're asking for a narrative, right? So the narrative should include not just all the pros, but here's the cons. But it should be real. It shouldn't be just these, you're going to lose 1 million grants. It should be what the actual law says you're going to lose.
Well, that's up to the FinCom. I mean, the FinCom has to do that kind of
But we're
analysis.
building a narrative so that the town understands, right? So they should also understand both sides, not just one side.
Well,
right?
I think what the narrative I'm talking about is how Appendix A and Appendix B relate to one another. How the two warrant articles relate and create this new zoning for our downtown. That's one narrative. There's a whole nother discussion that you could have about, here are the downside of 3A, here's the potential upside of 3A.
That has nothing to
whatever
do
that might
with
be, but that has
explaining how the
nothing to do
mechanics of this.
With this.
Nothing to do with political
Yeah, we don't
positioning.
want
It's just
any of
mechanics.
that.
It's purely mechanics.
Yeah, and so in terms
So
of.
is there not a mechanics aspect to this that we're supporting 3A in the zoning?
We're not supporting anything.
We have to vote on
We're
it,
just-
so,
has to be voted on.
So that's a discussion that can be had in the Hamilton Wenham paper or at the special town meeting.
I would say we have devised a plan of 2 zoning districts. And the 2 zoning districts will have minor impact on the character and quality of Hamilton's town. We've designed it in a way so that any redevelopment downtown is going to, augment and be really of not much higher density than what's there. And that's not going to happen unless there's infill development on vacant lots anyway. And if we go out to Asbury Street, there's a 40B out there, there's a whole bunch of Habitat for Humanity housing under construction, and there's a series of higher density townhouses for senior housing. And if, we follow through with a 4,000 square foot building footprint, what we're going to do out there is not going to
Yeah, I understand that, and I understand we don't want to make a political
change.
Yeah.
I think there's another venue for the political aspects of this.
No, I understand. I'm not
Benefits to the
suggesting we get into the political side of it, and I understand it's a tricky line here, but you understand the line in that town meeting is going to be so long, a lot of people throwing out threats. So to give the reality of each scenario is all I'm asking.
So
In
can I
the-
just to clarify,
Yeah.
so normally the town puts a narrative together. Ultimately, it is the select board's warrant. It'll be up to the select board what they choose to put in there for explanation. In this case, I'm happy to spell out the legal kind of framework and philosophies of why the articles are the way they are. But then beyond that, it's the select board's warrant, and they're going to put in whatever they want. So those are just conversations to have with the select board. The planning board can make a recommendation on that. They don't have to take my language, but I'm happy to supply language that explains how we got to
Right.
and why and the way they build on each other, all the legal parts of it. Beyond that, and even that, if they don't want to include it, but ultimately it's a select board warrant.
Right,
So we're having a meeting next Tuesday.
we are.
Okay.
Sorry.
And if we're being asked to vote at that meeting as a group as a board in front of the select board, because that is the meeting we're proposing to
Make our recommendation.
Yes.
recommend, is the recommendation based on, it's helping me to, because there is a consequence to us not agreeing or recommending.
The consequence of our doing nothing is that it goes to the town for a vote.
But then there was a
So
2-year,
the only consequence
Yeah.
of you
Right.
not making a favorable recommendation on this bylaw amendment is that if all or part of it fails, you do have a 2-year problem, which if you have to create consequences and it fails, makes it more difficult. It's not that you can't come back, but you'd have to come back with something substantially different. So, the benefit of you giving a positive recommendation is avoiding that 2-year consequence.
Then is there any, so the only way we could avoid, somebody's stuck in there, no.
spy.
So you're just saying that if we didn't give a favorable recommendation,
Yeah.
then we would have to have a material change before we could bring something back.
Yeah, so the statute says it can't come back without, it can't come back in 2 years without a favorable recommendation from the planning board. The most recent case law on this says it's the first time around vote that counts, not the second time around vote, right? Because, so the statute says it can't come back within 2 years unless it has a favorable recommendation.
Oh, so it has to be it has to be this coming vote. It can't be like in 6 months we vote favorably.
So there was a question in the law at one point of, well, when it says without a favorable recommendation, do they mean the first time it came forward, or do they mean the second time it came forward, or both? All I can tell you is that the most recent case law on that, it's a case involving the town of Barnstable that was in the land court. The judge said it's the first time around.
Okay, so it would be next week's
So it's
vote.
this time.
Got it.
In that case, he was saying you can't rescue it by saying, no, we don't want it, having it fail, and then coming back and you're going, well, this time we want it, now we win 2 years.
Wow.
I can't predict what would happen on a challenge in the future, or how the AG would treat it, or anything else.
Got it.
All I can tell you is the Barnstable case, the land court case, said it's the first vote that counts. So, again, as your attorney, to keep you and have the most flexibility and the best light, and I would, think in order to avoid the potential of a 2-year ban on coming back with essentially the same thing, you would need a favorable recommendation.
And then the other question I have, just because you had mentioned it earlier, is can we choose to make no recommendation?
Well, then it's the 2 years.
Right. So I didn't know if that was, so next week, pardon me?
Without a favorable recommendation.
But if we choose not to make any recommendations,
2 years.
is it in 2 years?
No, we can't come back for 2 years.
Okay.
Because
Because you said the first time we vote, but if we choose not to vote,
Yeah, but if you choose.
oh, it has to be favorable.
It has to be a favorable.
Got it.
recommendation the first time it
Yeah.
comes.
Got it.
So no vote or a negative vote is not favorable.
Okay.
and my second part was the recommendation we're voting is agreeing that the code we're presenting that has been developed meets the requirements of 3A, or we support the code that has been developed because it's the best thing for our downtown. What are we voting?
So you make,
Both.
basically.
What are we voting to recommend?
Both.
Yep.
On the warrant articles.
Report a recommendation to town meeting on the amendment. So
Mm-hmm.
generally speaking, you're saying to town meeting that we think you should pass this, or we think you should not pass this.
Okay.
And we would do this for both warrant articles.
Well, I mean, really, you're doing it as one amendment, but you could certainly.
Yeah, I think we probably should do it separate.
And then it'll go in the warrant planning. board,
Right,
you know,
exactly,
because
yeah.
Your report also gets reported at town meeting, and usually, how you guys do it, a lot of times you put it right in the warrant, right? Planning board recommendation. So, yeah, I mean, you could vote them separately. I think you probably also want to vote it collectively, like we
Right.
recommend the whole thing.
Right, right.
You know, like, in fact, if you only voted it collectively, I think that would be fine. Like, I don't think you need to vote them separately, be sure.
Well, in the warrant, it provides that, so
Yeah.
that's why I'm saying that.
And if Darcy's not here, does her vote pass to one of the associate members, or we just not have
No,
Darcy vote?
so associate members are only eligible to vote on,
Special permits.
Got it.
Oh, I didn't know that. Good question.
it's right in the statute.
And she can vote if she's on Zoom.
I think she'll probably try and be here.
Okay.
I hope so.
Yeah, she should just watch the video from tonight and do a Mullins
Right.
certification.
Oh, right.
You guys allow for that?
So we
Yes.
have heavy lifting at our next meeting. There's no question. I mean, it's
Oh, we did all the heavy.
I'm glad we had all those conversations tonight, though. Those were all really good questions about what we're voting for and how the vote impacts, and so we can be processing.
right.
Thank
And I
you.
think that we have to, I'll just throw this out. I mean, I've read the decision of the Plymouth Superior Court judge, and, while I, have some, say, issues, I mean, the reasoning I thought was a little conclusory in parts. What he did do, which was, I thought, pretty detrimental to the town of Hamilton, is he took the complaint, the motion for a preliminary injunction filed by the 10
Citizens,
taxable inhabitants of Hamilton, and treated that as if it were filed by the town itself. And he rejected absolutely every argument of every town across the board. And so unless one of those towns were to appeal, and we would only know that July 6th or 7th, then the likelihood of these regulations being overturned
yeah.
gets more and more remote. Would you agree with that, Robin?
Yeah, I mean, if nobody appeals, it ends those issues at least in
Yeah.
that case.
Well, that the unfunded mandate issue, he basically blew that right out of the water. He said that the Division of Local Mandates, their ruling's not definitive, and he said all the costs associated with 3A are speculative, and he didn't even accept the premise that one of the costs would be the administrative expense of hiring a consultant like Util. So it was pretty much a blowout for the towns challenging the
Can
regulations.
the 10 taxpayers from Hamilton, can they also appeal?
Sure, anybody can appeal, but you got to come up with the
I have an interesting.
change,
I-
and they've got to do it timely. But just because you appeal doesn't mean you prevail. I mean,
Correct.
that's
Oh,
the
I
other-
know, I understand that. I have an article that somebody wrote about that ruling that I will send to you. I thought it was an interesting take.
Right, but those go to what Jeff was talking about, not to what the planning board has to do. But we should be mindful of that reality. I think that it would, particularly given the 2-year ban on bringing something forward, that is a constraint on what we do. So how about a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Interested in that?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. We're all present, so we didn't even have to do a roll.